because there's not a little thing in my screen that says...
Yes, ma'am, you are now live.
Ah, there we go. Thank you, Alex. All right, sorry for the delay, folks. At 5:09, Monday, May 16th, we are calling the Finance Committee to order in the City Council chambers in a live session. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilor Cassett? Here. Councilor Lindell? Here. Councilor Rivera?
Here.
Councilor Vieira?
Present.
And Councilor Romero Worth.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Terrific, thank you. We will next move to approval of the agenda. Are there changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes, Madam Chair.
Changes from the committee?
Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Can we get a roll call? Oh, we don't need a recall. Do we need a roll call anymore? We can, it's a voice vote now, right? Because we're in person? I guess so. Sorry. We're all going to have to get used to this. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. The agenda is, the agenda is approved. Now we go on to the consent agenda. Are there items the committee would like to hear tonight? Councilwoman Cassett.
Yes, I'd like to pull item D, and then I just have a few quick questions on G, H, and I.
G, H, and I. All right. Other items? Councilor Lindell.
Well, I'm not able at this moment to get to our agenda, but I do know that I want to comment on A and I. So I'm trying to get this open and see if there were others. So I reserve a second bite at that apple.
The agenda. Does anybody have a copy of the agenda? Here it is. Take a look. Because if we approve an item, then we can't go back, I don't think, without tying ourselves into a procedural knot.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have a few items.
Yes.
Or just questions on item A, also item G, and item I.
Okey-doke.
They've already been pulled, but for the record, G and I as well.
Okay, G and I. Councilor Lindell. Yes. Yes. Okay. Is there a motion?
Move for approval as amended.
Second?
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Now we go on to approval of the minutes from May 2nd. Are there changes from staff to the minutes?
No changes, Madam Chair.
Changes from the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the Finance Committee minutes from May 2nd. Is this a roll call, or do we do this by voice vote? Okay. All those in favor of approving the May 2nd minutes, aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, those passed. Now we have two presentations tonight. The first one, the potential benefits and limitations of establishing a metropolitan redevelopment area project and plans. I'm reading from the PowerPoint, and we have City Attorney McSherry and her team with us tonight. Thanks for being here.
Sure thing. Thank you, Councilwoman Romero-Worth and members of the committee. Marcos is actually going to give most of this presentation. He and Andrea Salazar have been giving it. They gave it to EDOC last week, and she's not feeling well this evening. But I'm happy to be here to help support Marcos and answer any questions the committee may have, but I'll turn it over to Marcos. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just proceed and try to make this presentation as brief as possible, but also answering any questions you may have. Why metropolitan redevelopment for Midtown? Well, at a very basic level, Resolution 2022-12 directed the city manager to make recommendations to the governing body regarding the use of an MRA and/or TID for the Midtown district. This presentation summarizes our recommendations regarding the use of an MRA. So what is a metropolitan redevelopment area? The Metropolitan Redevelopment Act is a state statute that allows a municipality to access certain redevelopment tools in an area that is designated as a blighted area. And what are the MRA redevelopment tools? Number one, makes businesses within the MRA eligible for Local Economic Development Act funding. Two, it creates a commission dedicated to the planning, preservation, rehabilitation, redevelopment, development, or management of the properties designated by the governing body. Number three, it retains advisory oversight within the public sector. Number four, it incorporates public engagement throughout the process. And number five, it requires a redevelopment plan that aids in the elimination or prevention of blight or the conditions that led the development of blight, while addressing the displacement of any persons affected by the plan. Is Midtown eligible for an MRA? An MRA is designed to improve the economic growth, health, and well-being of a blighted area with one or more of the following characteristics. And many of these we find, or all, in the Midtown campus and its surrounding area. Deteriorated or deteriorating structures, defective or inadequate street layout, faulty lot layout in relation to size, adequacy, or accessibility, or usefulness, deterioration of site or other improvements, tax or special assessment delinquency exceeding the fair value of the land, diversity, defective or unusual conditions of title and ownership, improper subdivision, a lack of adequate housing facilities in the area, and out-of-date or impractical planning or platting, which results in low levels of commercial or industrial activity or redevelopment. So there are state law requirements that I'd like to go over too with respect to an MRA. First, the governing body would have to pass a resolution identifying a blighted area in the local government's jurisdiction and declaring that redevelopment of that area is in the best interest of the public. The state statute does require a public hearing on the resolution, which is a process that is over and above what the city ordinances typically require for adoption of a resolution. Adoption of an MRA plan. An additional resolution adopting the plan also requires notice, publication in the paper, and a public hearing on the plan itself. An MRA plan requires 4 elements. First, activities that will either eliminate or prevent blight or lead to the development of a blighted area. A method, second, a method to address residential displacement, if any, without undue hardship. Third, it has to conform to the general plan. And fourth, it has to maximize private and public redevelopment in alignment with community needs. Staff would also recommend potential ordinance changes, city ordinance changes. And that's because the city does have an ordinance that addresses metropolitan redevelopment areas now. And so we recommend that the city would adopt the 4 factors required by state law and replace the 17 elements listed under the current code. Those 17 elements are more design and aesthetic based, and I think that they can be addressed through the master plan that would be adopted. We also recommend removing internal references that no longer point to existing city code and add composition recommendations for the commission, such as qualifications that the governing body might be interested in seeing a commission possess. Now, stepping back, staff would also like to point out that the city has employed an MRA once with the rail yard. And so just a very brief history, the area was designated as an MRA, a community plan was created, the community plan turned into the MRA plan, the community and MRA plan then were transformed into the rail yard master plan. And then instead of having the area overseen by Metropolitan Redevelopment Area Commission and agency, the city decided to use an RFP to select a nonprofit entity to manage the rail yard. And finally, the city and the nonprofit entered into a lease and management agreement to develop the rail yard in accordance with the master plan. So we think there have been pros and cons to this approach. The city did not have to, one of the pros, I guess, would be that the city did not have to oversee negotiating the development of the rail yard, but just acted as a regulatory entity. The city did not have to determine which businesses would be in the rail yard. Developers could propose business plans without being subject to public records. Local businesses and nonprofits could thrive without rental rates becoming expensive such that relocation was necessary. One cons would be that the city did not retain any oversight of the nonprofit's decision-making. The city owns the land, which bifurcated the ownership of the buildings and the ground, and that ownership bifurcation complicated some property tax issues. And finally, the city's regulatory authority has been complicated, as this committee knows. We did also look at what other cities have done. Albuquerque is probably the most prominent entity using MRAs, and it uses them quite prolifically. The Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency is located within the city government. It is sort of a functioning agency that doesn't just exist on the books as it does in Santa Fe because, again, the city transferred those development and oversight activities to the nonprofit. And then one example that we think this committee may be familiar with is the Sawmill Area MRA. It's created a dynamic mixed use that incorporates affordable housing, museums, hotels, and local businesses. Las Cruces has also used an MRA for the downtown area, and the purpose of that MRA was to revitalize downtown, create jobs, and be a vibrant center for government, public events, arts, and culture, retail, and housing. Its goal was to enhance the quality of life for the residents and visitors while attracting investment into the area. So we want to talk also about the benefits of an MRA designation and some of the limitations. The benefits are potential funding sources. An MRA basically expands the eligibility of LEDA to any business located within the designated area. So it turns any business in the designated area into a qualifying entity under the statute and makes them therefore eligible for LEDA funding. There also might be grants that would be eligible, anti-displacement funding, brownfield, and other environmental funding. An MRA would also leverage existing opportunities, and in this case we are thinking of the opportunity zones that the United States Census tracts identified and the Treasury identified. It establishes a governance structure within city control with community involvement. Public participation is built into the process. Again, there are public hearings required with the relevant resolutions that are required to adopt a plan. Well, first of all, to designate the area itself, to adopt a plan, and to amend a plan all require additional public process, publication in the paper, and opportunities for the public to be heard. And commission meetings are open to the public. We think it also recognizes flexibility in valuing blighted areas, and so that way it deals with some questions about donation or disposing of the areas for what might be less than fair market value. The governing body would determine all land use dispositions, including leasing and sales of land, so permanent dispositions, but also leases that are over a year in length. The redevelopment plan itself also has to aid in the elimination of the blight. It has to address displacement of residents, if any, and it also maximizes the opportunity for rehabilitation to accomplish the public purposes and needs. There are limitations to an MRA designation. There's an additional layer. of approval processes, because there would be a commission that the governing body would create to oversee the Midtown and whatever the area ultimately designated by the governing body would be. The commission would likely require staff support. The commission has limited authority on temporary leases, so up to a year, and the commission doesn't have bonding or borrowing and lending power. Those might also be pros. So then, just to give you a visualization of where we might recommend an MRA designation be, there are two sort of colors on this map for you, and the yellow map, the yellow outline represents the link overlay. So this is sort of an overlay that the governing body has already recognized through a zoning overlay, and many of the purposes behind the link overlay dovetail very nicely with what staff would recommend with a metropolitan redevelopment area. The blue or turquoise line represents the census tract that we mentioned for opportunity zones. And this means that the federal government has already identified this area as having certain elements that it recognized economically depressed activity, some demographic elements, income levels, and therefore the federal government designated this census tract as an area in which investors could use for opportunity zones. And I think Rich Brown has spoken about that in the past. But another way to view the area would also to include the census tract directly to the north of the turquoise census tract, which is also an opportunity zone. And so it also satisfies those same demographic and economic depressive issues that I mentioned in the first turquoise tract. But there are many ways to draw this area. Next steps would be, if this committee and the governing body were interested, would be a resolution declaring blight. We would then also have to make a decision on what would be the specific area to designate, and then that resolution would create the metropolitan redevelopment area for Midtown. We would also recommend amending those ordinances that are identified in the PowerPoint presentation, 1987-33, 1997-11, and 2000-31, again, to make them consistent with state law and add qualifications to the commissioners appointed to the commission. That is my big picture overview of MRA, and I'd like to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Marcos, for the presentation. I think you did this with your maps, but whichever you decide to do, whether it's the link or whether it's the green line on the other map, that entire area is considered blighted then? Or a blighted community or blighted area?
So the designation would be considered a blighted area, and the reason we showed the link overlay was because that it was an area that the governing bodies are already identified as one where the governing body wanted to promote the economic activity in that area with an overlay that would simplify some of the permitting processes in that area. But I thought also showing where the census, the federal government, has identified these conditions that we might call blight conditions that existed. But the governing body has great discretion in determining what this area would be. So these are just staff illustrations of what the area could be.
And does it have to be set up through a commission, same as the way Rail Yard was, or can we define some other committee, commission, or process in order to do that?
So, forgive me, Councilor, could you repeat your question?
Do we have to set it up with the same structure that we did Rail Yard, or can we do we have other options?
Yes, so to answer your question, we do have other options. Staff does not recommend duplicating the process or the Rail Yard Community Corporation management and oversight. And we think that using the statutory tools of creating a commission, an unpaid commission and appointing commissioners would be a better way to oversee this area.
You talked about the opportunities that were available, like LIDA and other things, but you mentioned brownfield environmental. Can you talk about that a little bit more with, I guess, specifically around the old campus?
Yes, and this was at a high level of generalization, but what I will say specifically about the campus is there has been at least 1 or 2 phase 1 environmental assessments done on the campus, and there are certain areas that we think would then be eligible for potentially brownfield remediation funding or other state-based funding opportunities for remediating the environmental quality of either the soils or the water, underground water, if it was found also to be contaminated. So I think the point that staff was trying to make here, that I was trying to make here, was that this overlay works well with other types of funding opportunities. It doesn't specifically address or it doesn't specifically provide any type of funding. It would be an additional application process that we would have to do, but the designation itself would be consistent with seeking those types of funding opportunities.
Are there any downsides or negatives to being called a blighted area, I guess?
I mean, I would say that one of the drawbacks possibly would be some of the negative connotations with that terminology, but it's a statutory term of art. There are actually 2 types of designations that a local government can make under the statute. The first would be a slum area. It has different elements that we do not think are present in the Midtown area. And then blighted area represents more of a economic, well, it has these elements that I had read before, deteriorated structures, again, more talking about how perhaps the planning and platting of this area did not grow adequately or doesn't reflect the planning and other design elements that the city wants to see and in promoting new businesses and existing businesses.
So in all of the maps that you showed us with the outlines, I think there were homes in all of them. Does that affect resale value? Does that affect their ability to do anything within their community if they're considered in a blighted area? I know it's just for economic development, but does it affect homeowners in any way?
Councilor Rivera, that's probably a difficult question to ask. I mean, to answer. I'm sorry, it's easy to ask. It's difficult to answer, but I would answer part of it in this way. The census overlays have already existed for several years, and a couple of years. I think they were designated in 2019, and I don't think that there was the kind of pushback on home ownership values or private residential values or commercial activities that caused it to have sort of a negative effect on their commercial activities. If anything, I think what it did was create opportunities for investors to go into these types of areas that the U.S. Treasury has designated and to invest in these areas for certain tax benefits that were available to those investors. So at least from the example of the census designations of opportunity zones, we're not aware of any negative impacts from that designation. If the light designation follows a similar path, then hopefully there also wouldn't be any negative consequences there, but it's difficult to say. The other point I would just make very briefly is that the city doesn't have to include the residential areas. The turquoise overlay, as you see, didn't draw the distinction between commercial and residential areas. The link overlay did attempt to draw that distinction, and so you can see how designating the area itself will be, I think, important for this committee and the governing body to consider as they determine what would be the appropriate area. I guess the last point I would make on that is that in this process, when the governing body designates if the governing body were to designate a metropolitan redevelopment area, there is a process, a statutory process whereby persons who are in the proposed area of designation can come and speak about that, and there is even a court process whereby they can ask to be taken out of the area.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff, for your presentation. I just had a couple questions related to an MRA. So Albuquerque has one. It's within the city government, and so the staff makes decisions for MRA designations. There's no community committee or commission, or they don't use what is their planning commission. I forgot their name. It's like the environmental, I forgot the body. But I'm just curious how the process works for that. If it's structured by, is this an actual city government structure?
It's more like a division or department within Albuquerque's government structure. So, and it's somewhat set up that way, at least under our ordinances similarly, whereby the agency is the responsible body for making recommendations to the governing body about any kind of plans or designations, and then that agency acts through a commission, which is appointed by the mayor and under the statute or the city manager. So I believe they also have an executive director in Albuquerque who is a paid staff person as well, and then they have some other administrative staff too. But all of that is under the umbrella of the city within a specific metropolitan redevelopment agency.
So they do have a commission then?
They do have a commission.
And is it specific for MRA, or is it
Only MRAs.
Got it. The other question I had that I was confused about, because it was referencing the sawmill development, and the sawmill development, at least the housing part, it's a community land trust. So I'm curious if when you all were talking about the sawmill development, are we talking about this larger area now that just got redeveloped with the shops and the restaurants, et cetera? Or were you all referencing everything? Because the housing is actually separate, and I'm just curious if you know anything about that, like the difference.
Councilor Villarreal, I'll have to get back to you on that. I think Andrea had more discussions with the staffers of the commission in Albuquerque, but I'd be very happy to work with her and get back to you either directly or with Andrea. But I don't know if it had included the housing development, but that was my understanding, was that the designation was a large area. It included sort of the restaurant and hotel areas, but also I thought there was a housing component in there, but I want to be accurate in what I say to you, so I'll need to double check that.
Yeah, I think there is some new housing development that's included in this larger MRA. However, they have a component that was a community land trust that's separate. And I just want us to understand that distinction, because an MRA is not a community land trust. A community land trust is actually run by the community, and they have a board made up of community members that look at affordable housing, and they keep it affordable. So that's what I'm interested in, and then how that works alongside with an MRA would be my interest to understand how those work together, or maybe they don't work at all. So just to understand the difference. Related to blighted areas, in planning school, blighted areas are abandoned and vacant buildings, substandard areas, excessive vacant land, and that's not that neighborhood or anywhere around there. And that's my neighborhood that I grew up in. So when I think about blighted, I'm like, that's not a blighted area. And I'm hesitant to even call this area a blighted area, because there's people that live there, and it's pretty vibrant. There's a lot of, it's, low, middle income, but I just want us to be cautious about that word and how we utilize it. Because in planning school, that means that it's an area that nobody's living in, that you're trying to redevelop. And so I just want us to make sure we understand that distinction when we start looking at MRAs. And then the other thing is, I just want to remind my colleagues, the opportunity zones came about during the Trump administration, and there was never really a clear idea of like how they would utilize these zones to actually support the existing communities and neighborhoods. And so when you're talking about potential for investors to come in and tax benefits for them, all I can think about is displacement and gentrification. So I also want us to understand that better, because I don't think maybe they've redefined it with this new administration, but during the Trump administration, it was very clear it was kind of taking a different route. So I want us to understand that better as we're moving forward about opportunity zones and what that means for this area. And then also just maybe taking out the community component, although it is connected to Midtown. So yeah, I guess I just want to understand that better. And I think that's it. Well, one more thing. Just curious if you all have more information about anti-displacement funding and where that comes from, and who facilitates that funding source.
Councilor, I don't have a lot of more information on the anti-displacement funding. I do know that one of the core elements of this statutory scheme is that the plan, must address displacement. So it is a necessary element that any kind of redevelopment that is proposed here not cause undue hardship, and that's the language out of the statute, to any persons who might be living there. So I appreciated that portion of the plan. I thought that was spoke to some of the policies that I've heard the governing body espouse.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
City Attorney McSherry, you've got your hand up, so to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Romero-Worth. I just wanted to make a couple points. The term blight absolutely is a very charged word, and I think multiple times while we were working through this presentation, we were cringing ourselves because the elements that are required are just one or more of the ones that are listed. So it doesn't have to have deteriorated or deteriorating structures, right? It just has to have one of these bulleted elements. It could just be out of date or impractical planning, and that would qualify, which result in low level of commercial or industrial activity. So I think it's unfortunate that we're essentially forced to use that term because that's what the state statute uses. I think that's just one thing to keep in mind. It could mean something different in different contexts. And then on the maps, I think the outlines that we have there are examples of areas that are designated through other constructs. We could go with something that uses pieces of each. We could use part of the overlink with part of the opportunity zone if we thought something made more sense that was between those. But the maps just show what already exists, so you can kind of picture that and see what the other constructs have already established. Certainly, whoever came up with the term opportunity zone was using a much better marketing scheme than the blighted zone, right? So those are just a couple points I wanted to raise. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Cassett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and most of the points have pretty much been covered. I think my one question that's still hanging has to do with if residential zones were included in the quote-unquote blighted area, are there other benefits? I hear a lot of discussion about commercial. There does seem to be some of this anti-displacement funding that we do need to get some more information on. There's discussion of grants. Is there any other potential ways that this could actually benefit residential neighborhoods that we should be aware of as we're making this decision about whether or not to move in this direction and whether to include residential areas in the designated zone?
Councilor Cassett, I would begin to answer that question by saying that as we've talked about whether an MRA would be a good fit for this area or other statutory mechanisms like TIDs, what we discovered was that they work, they complement each other. In other words, they're not mutually exclusive. And so to the extent that a designation included residential areas, it would also then still be eligible for tax increment development districts, other types of financial mechanisms that could then be applied to all of the areas within the designation. So I think the idea was, should the benefits flow mostly to any improvements in infrastructure, street layout, flow mostly to commercial endeavors in these areas, or should it also be extended to the residents that live there as well? And so that would be part of the reason behind casting a wider net, would be to try to help the greatest number of people, at least from my view.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like infrastructure, so those are all publicly owned right-of-ways. Would any of the grants, I know that we already do have some work from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for helping individuals with home repairs or necessary upgrades. Would this at all expand those types of opportunities, or is that still just within our Affordable Housing Trust Fund?
No, it doesn't, to answer your question, it doesn't expand those opportunities directly under the statutory process. I think it's more of a way to identify where the city is focusing its redevelopment tools. It dedicates a commission that is not assigned any other sort of city responsibilities, policies, but only the redevelopment, the development, the rehabilitation, the improvement of this area for the benefit of the city. And its goal is really to address the underlying problems that have caused kind of the depressed economic activities in this area. But it itself doesn't confer any money to this area. It more gives a set of tools and reduces kind of some of the limitations under the anti-donation clause, and it expands the availability of LEDA, I guess directly is how I would answer that question.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it. I also am really interested in hearing more about some of the anti-displacement funding and what that potentially looked like where this has been utilized before. So whether in Albuquerque or Las Cruces, or if we even have an example from the rail yard, that would be, I think, some important information. I know that this is something that is a large concern for the neighborhoods surrounding Midtown. We frequently talk about Hopewell Man, but also a lot of my district, Midtown is my district, but a lot of the neighborhoods surrounding Midtown in my district also have some of those concerns of how the Midtown development could impact them. So I would really love some more information on what that looks like or what it could potentially look like. Thank you so much for being here.
Councilor Lindell, questions?
Thank you, Chair. Who drew the map? How did we come up with that?
So the maps were done by, I think, land use planning staff did the maps, and one of them, again, represents the link overlay in yellow and the census opportunity zone in turquoise.
Okay. I would really, of course, want to have real reasons for why the map looks the way that it does. And secondly, because CrimeGov doesn't allow us to download these, would you be sure that the entire committee is emailed this presentation, because we can't download it and hold on to it?
Yes, I will.
If you'd email it, that would be great, but Councilor Cassett says that I'm trainable and maybe things will improve, but let's cover all bases and email it to me. Thank you.
Just a quick question on, and I don't think, so the residential area, if it were included, does this impact property values for them?
Councilor Romero-Worth, I don't know that I can answer that question, and I think Councilor Rivera asked a similar question.
Yeah, he did.
And Maybe what I would suggest is that our office get in touch with Albuquerque, since they've been using these so much more frequently than we have. Perhaps they have some property, some information on that specifically, and I'd like to just follow up, be allowed to follow up with them so that I can give you better or more information on that.
And then you mentioned in your presentation that the resolution, that the first step is to pass a resolution which basically designates this area as meeting all the requirements of state statute so that it becomes an MRA. And you said that there's a requirement for a public hearing that is above and beyond our process when we pass resolutions. And I'm just curious, do you know any of the elements? And given that we've changed our process to do more public hearing in the passage of legislation, under our new rules, it still doesn't meet the standards that are required. And I guess I'm curious, like, what exactly is different? Like, what are they looking for in the public hearing for the resolution?
Councilor Romero-Worth, so the statute requires that there be first publication in the paper that this happened, and that would be separate from any kind of Open Meetings Act publication that would be required. It requires a public hearing at the meeting where the governing body is proposing to adopt the designation, make the findings of necessity, because the governing body needs to find certain elements are present to designate the area, and then to designate the area. So at that point in time, presumably the governing body would have settled on what maps, what areas would be within and without the metropolitan redevelopment area. So I was just speaking about the specific statutory requirements are not necessarily what we require when we adopt a resolution. And I just wanted to point that out, that I think that's it. That's mostly my point.
Okay, the city attorney looks like she wants to jump in.
Thank you, Chairwoman Romero. The main thing I would say is resolutions generally for us don't require a public hearing at all because they're not changes to law. But certain resolutions, and we have a couple other examples that happen on a regular basis. I think there's one related to affordable housing, certain ones related to federal funding, that kind of thing, do require a public hearing. So we often just add that, that element to our process. A lot of the other resolutions are just stating the position of the governing body on something. This is more, making a change to funding eligibility and jurisdiction, essentially, because we'd be delegating certain jurisdiction to this commission. So it changes something for the public more than just the position of the governing body, which is probably why the state statute requires a public hearing. So the primary difference is that even though it's a resolution, it would require a public hearing when most resolutions don't. And then it has the additional publication requirements that Mr. Martinez was describing as well.
Okay, so it's not like it has to be held in a particular place. Like, we don't have to do the public hearing in the area where it's happening. It's just requiring one when we pass it here in this chamber.
Chairwoman Romero-Worth, that's correct, yes.
Okay, sorry. All right, any other questions from the committee? This is not an action item, right? This is just presentation, just informational. All right, well, thank you, Assistant City Attorney Marcos Martinez, really appreciate it. And Aaron, thank you for being here as well. And I think we are on to our next presentation, which is an audit update. And I'm sorry I failed to introduce our presenter, which is Mr. Ricky Bejarano, the Interim Assistant Finance Director. And Whenever you're ready, no worries. Alex, can you jump out? Thank you.
We'll be meeting with the State Auditor's Office and representatives from there, as well as members of the New Mexico Department of Finance and Administration. And, of course, we will let you know what the outcomes are from that meeting. What we're hoping to find out is what direction the State Auditor wants us to take with regard to procuring a new auditor, and discussions around what type of oversight or additional oversight DFA would like. There's not a whole lot more progress from our meeting Wednesday. The consultants continue to work on reconciling cash. We're still at about the $1.4 million mark. They are finding different posting errors and whatnot, but then it doesn't amount to reducing that $1.4 million so far.
So I think there's been some confusion. Can we just be clear about this? So we had cash reconciliation where we had $4 million more money in the bank than we had on our ledgers. We have found everything but $1.4 million. So what does that, help me with the math? We found well, actually, it was a little more than 4 million, right? That we had in the bank and not in the ledgers. So how much have we found? How much are we still looking for?
Madam Chair, we've found approximately $3.2 million, or the consultants have, that had not been recorded in the general ledger. It made it to the bank, and you're absolutely correct. It was 4.6 million in excess of what the general ledger showed as opposed to what the bank records showed. With that, I'll proceed. One of my tasks here tonight is to update the Finance Committee on progress from the fraud prevention report that was conducted by McCard back in September of 2017. So I'll start with that. There are three primary areas of focus. One is finance and accounting, grant accounting, and accounts payable. In the interest of time, we've decided I'll cover only the finance and accounting department area of focus. The city engaged McCard Consulting LLC, who are forensic reviewers, in September of 2017. The risk assessment revealed that the city of Santa Fe had extremely high risk of fraud due to almost a complete lack of internal controls. My task here tonight is to give an update on that by areas of focus. The first issue that McCard pointed out was the audit trail for accounting software. At the time, it was reported that there was not a good audit trail whereby we could go in and see who had posted what level of review there was, what approval there was at the time. The recommendation was that we develop that. Once Munis was implemented, it's very easy for us to go to IT and know exactly what happened, who posted what, who changed what within the system. It goes by ID number. I personally, in the last 3 and almost 4 months, have actually made 2 or 3 requests from IT for this exact information, and it's been delivered typically within the hour. where we're able to see who posted what and what level of review there was. So that actually was completed. The second area of concern was that the chart of accounts was just too extensive and complex. It was recommended that when we implement the new Munis system, we reduce funds, most especially funds and business units. Funds were reduced from 711 funds to 76, and approximately 2,025 business units were reduced to 344 ORIT codes, which is within Munis replaced the business unit description. The McCart report showed that there was essentially no meaningful system of cash recon or reconciliation, and that we assigned, the recommendation was that we assign highly qualified employees to perform cash reconciliations. We have 8 bank accounts that roll into a higher level, I've gone ahead of myself, into the general operating account. Regrettably, this has not been done. We are looking into doing this. One of the tasks that we have ahead of us is that we will be moving the cash office, which is essentially cash receipts and revenue accounting office. We'll be moving that under the, essentially my supervision, under the general accounting department. Another finding was that the city does not have an appropriate accounts receivable procedures in place, and particularly with regard to receipt of cash again. It was recommended that we adopt those when we implement the Munis system, which was back in 2019. We do have an accounts receivable system within Munis. It's active. It can be utilized. However, the city has not utilized it up to this point. And we will be developing processes and procedures to utilize that system. One thing I want to mention is that we have a number of point of sale systems throughout the entire city. For example, at utilities, at various places with public works. Those are systems outside of Munis. What we need to do is develop procedures, policies, and a way to get that information, at least in total, into Munis with either uploads or general journal entries. That is something that the accounting department is working on. Within the report, the city's internal auditors expressed concerns over cashier and cashier supervisors being able to manipulate or smooth out, let's say, shortages of cash or checks, any type of payment. And it was recommended, of course, that we implement a system to address that immediately. This will be reviewed and revamped when we transfer the cashier section under the accounting department. We don't have a good established documentation of this, which we will have once we've moved the cashiering system under the accounting department. This is all essentially, in our parlance, it's internal control structure. Looking at the structure, looking at the system, this should all be an ongoing process. That it's not going to be a one and done. Once we develop the system, it has to be reviewed, probably initially every 6 months, and then going to yearly reviews to ensure that everything's working. Should things be changed? Should it be adjusted again? As times change, so should the internal control structure. Finding number 6 was that the accounting system currently applies essentially automated signatures of the mayor and at the time the finance director, but there's nothing to indicate that checks that have been signed automatically have any type of review by the mayor or the secondary signature at the time the finance director. Signatures have been moved to mayor, and now the city manager is the secondary signature. Within a couple of weeks, we'll develop a formal process whereby the mayor and the city manager are made aware of what checks are going out. It'll be a decision with them as executive managers what level of approval they want. They will receive a packet of all checks, and they may decide that they review maybe checks over $1,000 or over $5,000, and they can request backup. We'll implement a procedure whereby as soon as they request that backup, we bring it to them. So essentially, the mayor and the city manager will be very aware of what checks went out with their signatures. It sounds like a real basic thing, but it just was not happening. And if it was happening at any time, it wasn't happening in a formal, documented way, which we'll implement within a couple of weeks. That I can say is an easy thing for us to do, so we can pick that off very quickly. McCart found that financial statements were being recorded at the time by a single person and under just a single person's control. I can't speak, I wasn't here at the time, I can't say who was actually doing the work for the financial statements, but typically what you have, especially when you have as many funds, even as we have now, but especially as the city had at the time, accounting and getting information into financial statement form is a multi-person task. First, there's the drafters of the financial statement, and then there's intermediary review, and then there should be a final review, probably by someone at my level, and we need to develop that. Currently, financial statements are drafted and released through consultants. We have to bring that back in-house, and we intend to do that. I can't give a drop-dead timeline, but I would say a year is sufficient time to have this implemented. There was a concern with the city continually using the same audit firm, and that has since been cured. There are several, I think there have been 2 firms that have been used since this report came out. Now we'll go to a third. There was also a concern that at the time the assistant finance director was the only person interacting with auditors, and there are a couple of issues there. One, the firm doing the audit should never have allowed that. Ever since the Enron debacle, Statement of Accounting Standards 99, which has since been replaced, dictated that auditors should have access to anybody doing any of the accounting work or any of the financial work, and that it be free from any interference from management or governing body. That was cured, so auditors primarily interacted more recently with finance director, assistant finance director, chief accounting officer, and any relevant staff. That will continue and might be even more open. So to put it very simply, we can't have a system whereby the auditors make a request or have an item that they're requesting, and that I go get it, retrieve it from that staff member and present it myself. We want the interaction to be as open and staff to be as accessible to the auditors as possible for transparency and audit purposes, and that will occur. There was essentially a segregation of duties issue, is what I would call it, between the accounting department and the budget department at that time. This has been addressed, and the roles have been segregated. There's still a little bit of work that needs to be done, and we'll do that when we do our internal control revamp. There were issues related to training at the department level, and the recommendation, of course, was that we implement a system. This process is currently in review by the accounting department, and more training will be developed and implemented. The finding was that the city had and continues to have multiple areas where revenues enter the city coffers, and there were no clear policies and procedures. This process is currently under review by the accounting department and treasury, and part of the solution will be to transfer the cash revenue functions under the accounting department so that the internal control is in place and it's so that it is consistent. Excuse me. City department employees have the ability to post invoices and other transactions into previous fiscal years. We're in the process of reviewing this. We're not sure that this is or is not happening, but it is possible for it to happen within the system. So that's one of the things that will be shut down when we go to month-end closes and year-end closes. And those will need to be hard closes so that no one can go back in time and make corrections or adjustments. At the time, several employees expressed concerns that non-sufficient checks were a substantial problem. They are still a problem. We're not retrieving. So if we have a bounced check, there is no process currently in place to go after that money and to have a good collection system over that. That is another thing we're reviewing and that we will have in place. This is something that is easily cured, so it should be in process within a couple, 3 months, maybe a quarter. Accounting data, this was an interesting finding from my perspective. I know the McCart firm well, and I want to have a discussion with them about this. Ever since we've moved to ERP systems, all ERP systems require journal entries as a way of getting information in and out of the system. Had I been around at the time, I probably would have had some pushback with this, because a lot of the manual procedures that existed at the time that ERP systems came into place were replaced by doing general journal entries. The old days, back in my time, general journal entries were considered, when I started auditing, we had to review general journal entries 100%. That would be impossible for an audit firm to do. We do hundreds, if not thousands, of journal entries. It's just something that comes with ERP systems now. So I'm not sure that this can be cured, because it's just not possible to get certain information into the system without journal entries. Journal entries are essentially entries that don't automate through the system. They aren't created by the system to continue that automation. This finding is somewhat redundant with, I think it was finding 13, that personnel have no significant training. Our task will be to develop a curriculum by position, and we intend to do that and have it developed at least within the finance department by June 30th of 23. One of the findings, finding 17, was that the city uses irregular, outmoded, and meaningless job titles. We currently have a citywide class and compensation study going, and HR is conducting the study and is responsible for that. And that should cure this finding. The city uses processes which may have made sense in the past, but no longer make sense at all. This was in 17. That probably continues, and it's going to be part of our review of the overall internal control structure and the internal control policies and procedures, and that should be cured with that review and revamp. With that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. I always forget your title. I think it's the interim part. Interim Assistant Finance Director, Mr. Bejarano. That's a mouthful. Thank you for that presentation. I just want to quickly let the committee know kind of where we're going with this. So the McCard report we're all pretty familiar with. I think it still represents the best roadmap of what we need to do to cure and right the ship, now I'm mixing metaphors, cure the problems we have and right the ship overall. So tonight we heard about the findings that Bacard had in the Finance and Accounting Department. At our next meeting, I'd like to look at the findings around grant accounting, and it'll be something similar, probably a similar number of slides. And then the third would be the accounts payable. And I think one thing as we look to diving deeper in these problems and making sure that they're making progress is this will be helpful to us, because I think we can go back and say, all right, where are we in these recommendations? How are they coming along? And I think it gives us a pretty good understanding of what's going on internally and what has happened, what is being worked on, and what still needs to happen. So we'll be coming back to this, and it will take us a few meetings to get through all the pieces that Bacard laid out and where we are in that process. So just wanted to give the committee a little bit of preview of coming attractions, perhaps. And now we can go to questions from the committee on this presentation. Councilor Cassett.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Interim Assistant Director Becker. No, you're right, that is quite a mouthful for the presentation. Can we please have this one emailed to us? I don't have it on PrimeGov, and in the future, can we get these in advance? Because this is some pretty meaty material that I think would be really helpful to have preliminary review of before the meeting.
I'm sorry, Councilor Cassett, that was the last thing I was going to mention, was that you will be getting this in your email box, and sorry we didn't get it to you before.
Great, thank you. I just had a couple questions. First of all, in this, I think it was 17 issues identified, correct?
That's correct.
18?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, yes.
And how many of those, how many have been cured and how many are still pending?
I would consider 3 fully cured and the rest pending,
Okay.
some type of adjustment.
So I think we talked about this at one of our previous meetings about how we really create a visual roadmap that's easy for those of us who are not living this every single day. For me, I think it'd be great to actually get a table that kind of shows where we are so that we can continue to track this. If that's possible, I would greatly appreciate that. I think I'd find that very helpful.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, there should actually be the proper way to do this, or to have done this, is create either a physical or a digital notebook showing the progress, finding sheet by sheet or table by table, and showing the progress as you go. The other thing I would like to stress is that this is not a one-and-done process. I've said that before. So this, especially these issues, need to be reviewed constantly. I set a mark of maybe every 6 months to start out with, but at least yearly they should be reviewed. And that's for the entire control structure.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I definitely looked, especially some of them really call out to me as an iterative process. Some seem a little bit more, not quite one and done, but one and review and make sure it's still meeting the needs. So I appreciate that, and that'll be good for us to continue to follow up on. I had just a couple questions on some of these, and when I actually get the PowerPoint and able to read it, I might have some follow-up as well. So one said that we need to assign a highly qualified employee for cash reconciliation, and it sounds like that would just be one position. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, yes and no. The highly qualified individual is the overseer, ensuring that everything and everyone is in place on a continual basis to ensure that cash is being reconciled. With today's technology, we have the ability to reconcile cash every day. And as I've talked to some people that have more institutional knowledge, Evidently, we had a couple of those positions. Those, for whatever reason, at certain points in time, those positions went away, and there was nothing to fill those gaps. And the duties either were assigned to other individuals who didn't follow through, or they just stopped. And primarily, it's reconciling cash every day and not necessarily doing an official reconciliation in form, but that's making sure that you know what was expended, which checks were processed by the bank, and eliminating those. One of the problems we had with the audit is that we showed hundreds of outstanding checks, but that had already cleared the bank. So we had to go in systemically and remove those. Same thing with deposits, which we obviously had a hard time with.
And is that one of the 4 new positions that was listed recently? I know that and at the governing body, we discussed 4 key positions that were going to be filled. Is that a part of this?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, yes, that would be what's currently termed as the Treasury officer, but that actually, the right term would probably be cash control officer or cash officer, something along the line. But yes, and that would need to be somebody that has a good, strong accounting background with cash, but also that what would be more desirable, at least for me, was that they also have a financial audit background as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And then you mentioned that there is now I have to read my own shorthand. I'm assuming that means account reconciliation Munis system that we have and that we have not been utilizing. Do you have information as to why we have not been utilizing this at this time?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, yes. We've spoken to 2, Tulsa is one municipality. Former colleague, or current colleague, but former coworker of mine is the CFO for San Juan County. They also use Munis. They're at 19.3. Neither one is using the cash reconciliation module or the reconciliation accessibility within Munis. We've yet to find anybody who's using that automated technology within Munis. What I need to research is it because it's too complicated, what we would need to be doing. Part of it is that when you do it in an automated way that way, the 2 systems, the banking system and Munis, would have to somehow communicate, upload and download information as you go, and that may be the hitch.
Okay.
But we do have the capability without the automation to reconcile on a daily basis. It just needs to be established and it needs to be moved forward.
Okay, great, thank you. And then you had mentioned that right now you can essentially post in a previous fiscal year and that we're going to be doing month-end and year-end closes, and those will be hard closes. Would there be an override ability in case there is a mistake so that those can be corrected? Would you see a scenario where you would want an override ability? How do we balance that out? And also including those internal checks and balances that we've talked about.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, I'll start with the last question first. There is no conceivable reason to ever go back and open up a period and adjust that period after it's been closed. Those adjustments are more appropriately, or are appropriately made within the current year as prior year adjustments. And they need to be disclosed to the auditors when auditors come in. And actually, they should be disclosed to this committee. If we find something that went amiss in a prior year that we didn't catch, it actually should be, and appropriately should be reported to this committee. The reason that we can go back, currently we have 21 and 22 open. In order to open 23, we're going to have to hard close 21 by hook or by crook. Whether we're ready or not, whether the audit's complete or not, we're going to have to shut it down. Otherwise, we won't be able to even open up the budget for 23. That's another reason to do hard closes. The systems have some built-in essentially security mechanisms. That's one of them. Leaving prior years open as long as we've left this one is never advisable. Now, part of what the system will do, when you close your system, there should never be any overrides. I think systemically it might be possible if you could get ID to do that. That needs to be one of the measures that it just shouldn't ever happen.
Right, so what I'm hearing, though, is that there is a mechanism by which to record that if something does happen, but it would be within the current fiscal year, or the current month, I assume, if we're doing hard month-end closes, that if...
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, that's correct.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you. I appreciate you going into detail about these, and once we get these slides and I read up, I will let you know if I have any additional questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can definitely go back to this presentation as we move forward with the others, and if the committee has questions after they've seen the slides, we'll make time for that. Other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bejarano, the audits that they said, they didn't want us changing, or they wanted us changing companies a little more frequently, but I think one of the issues was that employees were then going from one company to the other company because they were familiar with the city. Has that changed?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that I'll have to look into and get back to you, because it's more institutional knowledge that I would need. However, the current state auditor rule requires you to issue requests for proposals after 3 years of the same auditor. You can select the same auditor, but you still have to issue that request for proposal. Most people don't like switching auditors. It's like switching dentists or hairdressers or whatever. And it is more difficult to go in. First year of the audit, having been on that side of things and with firms, most firms, I would say, at least the ones I've worked with, lose money the first year because you're not used to that client and whatnot. And so, and then it smooths out by the end of the third year, where the firms are actually turning a profit. It's very difficult, especially in this day and time, to go into a firm first year and bid it out to the point that you can actually make a profit. So on the other side, that's one of the reasons firms like to continue. One of the reasons, though, for limiting that amount of time is that you start getting cozy relationships between staff and the auditors. And I'm just speaking in hypotheticals here. I don't know that was what was going on. But I'm familiar with the particular firm at the time, and there were some audits with other agencies, with other entities, where that firm was requesting extensions and getting them at the time. And they were up to 8, in some cases 9 years. And that, at least as a city, we should never do, because you don't want those relationships to get too crazy. And I think that's what McCard was trying to point out.
McCard, the report was done under a very antiquated system, and now we're using something brand new. When's the appropriate time for a new report?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we're actually heading into an upgrade. The new system that we have, or at least that was implemented in 19, is actually 7 years behind. The upgrade will take us from 11 to 19, so that's actually 8 years. It's time to upgrade into the new system, into the new upgrade. And it is, the differences between 11 and 19 are quite different and much improved.
I'm talking about a new report similar to what McCard did based on the new structures and the new program that we have.
Unfortunately, based on the analysis that I've done, the report would probably be a lot the same. We've got to get our internal structure set, and our internal control structure set, and we've got to implement and document policies and procedures that describe everything to the best detail that we can. I don't know that it would behoove us to spend that kind of money because we already know what the results are going to indicate.
And do we currently use electronic check cashing system?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, if you're referring to like ACHs and electronic fund transfers, is that?
Direct, so you take somebody a check and they run it through a system and it deals with it immediately
We still deposit checks.
on a daily basis or even as they come in?
The law requires us to deposit checks by the next business day or within the next business day.
They have systems now that they run it through and it takes it out just like a debit card, don't they?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, and that I'm not familiar with the point of sale systems. I'm assuming that they do process checks that way. If we're not processing them, we need to get there. I will look into that and get a definitive answer with the various point of sale systems that we have throughout the city.
All right, and are we looking at going cashless anytime?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that would be my hope. I will say that when I tried to do this when I was in the Comptroller's office with the state, when I've tried to do this at Tax and Rev when I was there, the pushback was amazing. I tried to do this when I was at the Hemis Electrical Cooperative. The pushback was too intense. I've never been successful in moving any entity to no cash, and I think we'll see that everybody comes out of the woodwork to oppose that.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions? Counselor Lindell.
Thank you. I think it would be really helpful if everyone would receive a copy of the card report again so that it could be reviewed. I have a copy of it from September 2017. I think it's important to put some context on time of when this was going on and who was here then and who wasn't here then. And we talk about, we had a assistant that insisted that they were the only person that could deal with the auditors. I don't know exactly what years those were, but I know it was prior to 2017. So very few of the people in finance right now were here then, or some were, but not very many. But I think it's important to get some context on this and for all of us to, the copy that I have is 37 pages long. So I don't remember because I haven't read it in quite a long time, but it seems like there 70-some issues.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I can look that up right now.
So while you do that, again, all we did for tonight was take a chunk for presentation, and we'll be hearing 2 more areas in the coming meetings. I have a hard copy of the McCard report. You are right, it's 37 pages. And we did not cover all of it in this 18-slide presentation. So we'll be coming back in the next meeting and the meeting after that, if that's helpful. Did you find a number?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, no, I think the only copy I have is hard as well.
And as I look at my hard copy, every page has a recommendation, but they are not numbered, so we'd have to go through and count, Counselor.
Well, I'm just saying, my point is that there were a lot of findings on this. I mean, the one, I'm looking at number 52 right now, so I don't think I'm so far off with saying that there's 70. But anyway, that's my point, is to try to get a time frame on this, and I think that everybody on the council probably should get a copy of the report, because I think it's been a long time since those have been distributed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for the presentation, and we'll look forward to more incoming attractions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councilors.
All right. Hold on. Let me go back. So we are on our consent agenda. We have a number of items to cover. All right, we'll start with item A, which is an ordinance relating to the City of Santa Fe Uniform Traffic Ordinance, creating a new Section 5 of Schedule B of the UTO to create the Low-Income Financial Equity Parking Program. And we have our Parking Division Director here tonight to answer questions. I think we have two counselors that pulled this, if I'm correct, Councilor Lindell, Councilwoman Villarreal. So I don't know who wants to jump in. Councilwoman Villarreal, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Director Correa, and I want to thank the sponsors for putting this forward. I'm in support of the LIFE program, or as you're calling the LIFE program. I think it's important. It, just, even though it didn't really address this directly, there are instances where when you make adjustments like this, people tend to pay their fees if they're given opportunities for adjustments, and making those adjustments based on income. I just had a couple of questions just to make sure the information we have is complete. One, I'm looking at the revenue narrative in the FIR, and it talks about this being a new program and how many people would qualify potentially. And I was just curious, Director Correa, if you could tell us how you came about the 11%. You said staff anticipates that 11% of those with past due balances both would qualify for the LIFE program and would seek to enter into an agreement. So I'm just curious how you came up with that, because it sounded kind of low. I actually thought more people would potentially qualify, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
The 11%, I'm sorry, Councilor Chair and Councilor Villarreal. The 11% I came up with is a very conservative estimate or guesstimate, and the reason for that is we do not have any prior data to show us as to what that participation will be. So for that reason, we decided to go a little on the lower side. However, that doesn't mean that only 11% would participate. Furthermore, I would like to add is that the marketing side of the program, letting people know that that program exists and what it's all about, I think will definitely increase those numbers.
That's good to hear. How would you actually market this to people that, is that people that you have identified as potentially in debt right now, or how would your staff recommend it, or what's kind of the, I guess I'm curious how you would structure it so that people are aware of it.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, there are several ways we plan on marketing. First one would be putting it on our website when the program starts, once approved by the governing board. And then, of course, we are definitely going to go through the PIO, have some press releases. And finally, we do not want to get into a situation where, even though we know who these individuals are, it takes a long time to get their addresses, information, to mail them notices from the MVD, and I don't think we have the staff to go through that. So sending notices to each and every person who has unpaid citations, not necessarily who qualifies for life, would be a major undertaking that I don't believe we need to, and I don't think it would really produce any greater results than what we are hoping we'll get through the original plan, which is press releases, postings on our websites, and maybe even posting flyers at our entrance doors on 500 Market Street. That's the original plan. And if the results are very unfavorable, then we can always expand to the next level.
So if someone called and talked to staff and wanted to know their options, say they couldn't pay or they were already underwater to pay, do you all talk to folks like that? They call in and ask questions about that?
Yes, absolutely. So when they do call, and we do get calls and emails, then this is something that we will automatically pass on to them. And then currently we do advise them or guide them about the appeal system that we have in place, what the time frames are for them to qualify for the appeals. And so we do pass that information on. So, yes.
I think there'll need to be more staff interaction with this, because putting it on a website, people don't look at our website, and it's very hard to navigate. To PIO press release is very limited as to who it goes to, and it's probably not going to target the people that need to know about this. So I guess I'm wondering if there's another kind of outreach level that you all could do with groups like LifeLink or others that actually know about folks that are struggling with parking citations or whatever they're experiencing. So I guess I just want us to be more proactive about that, because this way that you're describing about letting people know, it's not going to reach the people that need to know about it. And from what I heard, it's sometimes hard to get a hold of you all and to actually talk to a live person when there is problems with citations. So yeah, I just want us to be cognizant of that, because we want to make sure that it's not like we're promoting it, but we want to know that people have the ability to know that this is an option for them. So the other thing I was wondering is if maybe you could provide, computer is driving me crazy. Okay, so there's a total unpaid citation amounts that you provided us by fiscal year, which was helpful. And I don't know if maybe later you could actually dissect that even further and tell us how many of those unpaid citations are actually, how many individuals that is. Because right now we're just showing amounts. It would be good to just see how many people do these amounts equate to, so that we get a better idea of who's the number of citations that are unpaid at the moment based on that amount. So I don't know if you have that data, but I'd love to see that just to get an idea of individuals or, yeah. So I think that would be helpful. And then last, I just wanted to note that for the FIR, right now it says there's no expenditures are not available, and I actually think there will be until it starts balancing out. So there will actually be maybe I think it would be helpful to have the narrative show that once we start implementing this, we won't see this start, what is the word, not balancing out, but that we start seeing people utilizing this so that fees start getting paid or citations get paid, but what I want to see is, like, right now it just shows revenue, and there's definitely a expenditure piece to this. And I'm okay if it doesn't balance out, because I think it will eventually, but at first, the first few years, we're not going to see that complete shift. So I don't know if there's a way to show that in some way. Because right now, it just says no expenditures, but the expenditures will be loss of, at the beginning, it'd be like loss of revenue, which we're already, it's already existing now. But I guess I just wanted to see if there's a way to show that there's a loss of revenue, but then it starts equalizing as the years go by, and then we actually get these revenue sources that you're talking about. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to understand it. I don't think it will see it balanced out right away, but I guess I just wanted to understand if there was a way to show that the outstanding fees that we still have, that they're actually, in the later years, we're seeing that revenue come in. Does that make sense, or is there a way to show that? Maybe not tonight, but later on?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, these citations that are pending or have not been paid, past due, over 5 years, the potential of recovering that money is nil. However, this LIFE program is going to have an opportunity, or bring an opportunity, where these revenues could start coming in, because there's an incentive for people to get it off their record and pay at a reduced rate. The difficulty in getting to a point at this start of the game as to how many may pay, how much revenue is going to come in, and compare that to the fact that right now, as it stands, there's zero amount coming in, or will come in, is the best that I can do. However, 6 months maybe into the program, we can definitely come back with an informational report to Finance Committee and the Governing Board, if necessary, and then present to you what exactly was recovered. As to cost with respect to staffing, we are in the process of filling all the vacancies that we had that were due to COVID-related budget cuts, what have you. We will be fully staffed by the time this program is implemented, and we will have staff who will be processing these applications as they come in, just like we currently process all of the administrative appeals that come in where people contest or appeal a citation.
Okay, so it's going to be folded into the appeal process that...
That is correct.
Got it. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Let's see, I think I had Councilor Lindell and then Councilor Rivera.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, Noel. My concern with this is that this is going to take a lot of record keeping. Do we have software that does this? How are we going to do this? We can't even keep track of when bills are up for sunsetting or to be reviewed. This is a lot of, I don't know how this gets done manually. Is there a software program for this?
Madam Chair and Councilor Lindell, the current software that we have that keeps track of every citation that is issued, every citation that is appealed, every result of the appeal, how many of those citations are paid at the original fine amount, how many are paid at the original plus penalty level. All of that information is tracked accurately, and once it's entered into the system, it cannot be modified, deleted, changed, or what have you. Those results are permanent. So that is the same process and the same system program that we will use for this purpose, to track everything.
Okay, so say I get a parking ticket and I qualify for this program. I have 15 days to pay my parking ticket, correct?
Yes.
So within that 15 days, I need to contact the parking office, and I need to fill out the paperwork and get qualified. If I don't do that within 15 days, I still owe the full amount of that ticket, correct?
Yes and no. Correct with respect to you still owe the full 35 initial dollars that you got. This program is more customized or designed for those individuals who have not paid their citations over a period of years, and they have penalties accrued, that we are giving them an opportunity. So this program will not reduce a fine amount that is in place in the Uniform Traffic Ordinance by ordinance. So the $35 is not going to be discounted by 50% when you first receive a citation. This is more for those individuals who did not take care of the citations and have several accumulated over a period of 5 years. They get this opportunity to pay off their balances, whether it's $500, $1,200, and that's the target of this LIFE program.
Okay, so I didn't understand that. That wasn't clear to me, that this is not for someone that gets a ticket this week. This is for someone that has a stack of tickets already.
That is correct, Councilor.
So how do we keep track of people that this says it can be used up to 2 times within a rolling 5-year period? So I'm a little confused about how that works.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the program I had referenced earlier keeps track of every citation issued to a vehicle, the license plate, not an individual per se. Most people who are on this list either still own the cars that they accumulated the citations on, or have sold their vehicles, or the cars have been scrapped. Regardless, we will still go and contact them based on information that we get from the license plate. So when a license plate is paid, one way or the other, either through the full amount or through LIFE program, that gets recorded into the system. So the next time the person comes up, we just plug in the license plate and or their name and address, and we get their whole history as to who has participated in this program, how many times, and if they have another opportunity to participate again. So the program tracks all this automatically by license plate.
So let me try to clarify my concern here. So I have 10 parking tickets that I haven't paid in a very, very long time. And I hear about this program and I apply for it, and I'm able to, I'm told I do qualify and that I can pay 50% of my outstanding fines, correct?
The first time, correct.
And how long do I have to pay those?
30 days.
Okay, so I pay them. So then what we're saying is that I get a whole nother stack of parking tickets?
And if you did, the second time that you will qualify, if you apply, you'll only get a 25% benefit within a 5-year period. So there is the time limit that within 5 years, you can only benefit from this program twice. The first time at 50%, the second time, if you did accumulate any additional citations, it would be 25%.
So the second time, I've already taken care of this stack over here. Next time I get a citation, I'm already in this program, right? So doesn't the 25% only apply to one new citation?
If it's only one new citation at the original fine amount, then this program cannot be applied to it, because we don't change or lower or modify penalties that are, the fine amounts that are already established in the Uniform Traffic Ordinance. If this one citation in this example had received penalties, which is, doubling of the original fine amount for the first penalty and a third of the amount for the second penalty, then yes, the individual would benefit and get the 25%.
Well, I've got buy-in on the first-time participant. I'm a little iffy on the second-time participant with the 25%. I'm not sure that I'm all in on that. You only get to use it twice in a 5-year rolling time frame. I'm also concerned about the amount of staff time that it's going to take to implement this program. But those are my questions, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you said the initial ticket was $35, just an example, and you had 15 days to pay it. After that 15 days, what happens? Does it double? Does it?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, the first penalty is doubling of the original fine amount. So when that happens, the 35 will go up to $70.
All right, and after that?
We'll take 30% of the $70 amount and add it together, and I believe it comes to 120 something. Pardon me for that amount. I think it's less than 120. Sorry about that. Whatever that calculation comes to.
That's okay. It continues to go up. Does it go up any more after that?
No, it caps at that second penalty of 30% on top of the first two, original fine amount plus the penalty.
All right, so if you work at the rail yard and you're, a waiter or a waitress and you're forced to park in certain areas, you could have multiple tickets, but they cap out at $120.
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, again, I'm not 100% sure right at the moment about the 120. It is $70 plus 30% off 70. So it about 98 or something, I think. 90, yeah, there you go. Thank you very much, Council. I appreciate that.
And then what you said, if they pay this or qualify for this program, they can get it off their record. What does that mean?
So currently, they have the license plate as it's listed on our program. This is on their record with respect to number of citations and violations they have of the UTO. Once they have paid and used live to benefit with the discount, their whole record goes to zero as paid in full, and they start all over again without any unpaid citations.
So it's their record with the city, not necessarily their motor vehicle division record.
Well, it's a combination of both. When we issue a citation, we only get the license plate of the vehicle that's parked illegally. We submit that license plate to the MVD to get the registered owner's information. So we do need to have this relationship with the MVD to get the information of the registered owner.
Do you know if MVD puts warrants out? They
No.
know or they don't?
No, they don't, sir.
Okay. Regardless of the number of tickets that you have.
That is correct. The state is definitely not interested in cities' parking violation programs.
Great. Do we know, based on these amounts, I imagine you have to know if there's one individual that holds the record for the most unpaid tickets, I don't say record, but has a high amount of unpaid unpaid parking citations. Do we know what that amount is by one individual? And you don't have to name them, just,
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, no, off the top of my head, I do not know who this individual could be. What I do know is the average amount that people owe is about $430.
there's a reason that probably the initial $35 wasn't paid. So have we thought, or maybe the sponsors thought of, instead of, if they can't pay the initial $35, then maybe they have an average of 430 in citations, about doing some kind of community service or something in lieu of, can't pay the 35, I doubt you're going to pay half of the 430, even if the program's available to you. Was there any thought put into doing community service or something extra instead of trying to come up with a monetary amount that you couldn't pay initially? No? I agree with Councilwoman Lindell that I think this is going to be a nightmare to try to track. The initial one will probably be fine, but after that, the 25% and how it moves after that, I think might be a little bit of a challenge. But overall, I think it's a good program. What's happened to fiscal year 16 and before that? I imagine there are still unpaid tickets from that point. Have we wiped them off the books yet?
We have no choice but to do that, and the reason for that is because of the statute of limitations.
Okay. And does that come through the governing body, or you just do that administratively?
We do that administratively because the state law requires that it be done.
All right. I think that's all I have for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have unpaid parking tickets, it keeps you from qualifying for other assistance, doesn't it? Or does it?
Well, it does. Only on city programs. For example, if somebody wanted to get a permit for a loading zone and they have unpaid citations, they would have to clear those before we can issue a loading zone permit for them, as an example.
Are there any others you can think of?
It could impact their ability to get a monthly garage permit to get into the garages to park, yeah.
And in terms of the tracking, so you have something that's keeping track of people's tickets and what they've paid, so when they participate in this program and they get the half off of what they've owed, that'll be reflected in your program, so that if they were to come back 3 parking tickets later, you'd be able to see they paid half, they got 3 more tickets, they're still in the 5 years, so they're now eligible for the next, the lesser amount, and you'd be able to see that they'd already participated. So it's just like it's a running list, right?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay.
The system tracks the record by license plate. And once that license plate is plugged in, it gives us the entire history on this particular individual, past history and current present history.
And do you see this as, I mean, we are going to collect money that we might not otherwise have collected because we are allowing some mercy for people who have accumulated what you said was the average, something like $400 in fines, parking fines.
Yes, so they would end up, the first time, they would end up paying only $200. If 400 was the example we take, that's 50%. And that would bring them back to 0 and not have any kind of a past history showing unpaid citations.
So we may actually instead of writing tickets off, we may actually get paid for some of these tickets.
And there is the benefit of life, yes,
Yeah.
for the city as well, yes.
Okay, just a couple questions there. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up, so how do you let folks know when they have outstanding balances currently?
So when a citation is issued, and, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, when a citation is issued, an automatic notice in the form of a postcard to keep our postage costs down is sent to the registered owner's address, advising them that they have received the citation, the location, and what the violation was and what the fine amount is. That's the first notice. If we don't hear from them within those 15 days, a second notice is sent to them advising them that a penalty has accrued because of non-payment or they did not appeal. So not all citations have to be paid. They can be appealed as well, as we know. So that's the notification that we send out to people that, number one, they know they have received the citation, they have 15 days to pay, and the second is that they have failed to pay and or appeal, and now that it has gone up into the penalty phase.
So if you're able to identify the people that have these outstanding balances because you're sending them notices, how can you then proactively send them information about this program? Because if you're sending it out anyway, wouldn't it make sense to actually tell them, like, we have this program, if you qualify? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out a way that the folks that need to hear about this, especially the ones that you're sending multiple notices and there's a higher balance, how you actually can notify them of the program.
Madam Chair.
Doesn't mean that they qualify, but just at least they know about it.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I apologize if I indicated that we were going to send notices to these people who qualify. That I believe I had said that we don't have that ability with the number of staff that we currently have to send. It would have to send to everybody who has a balance, because there's no way we can identify who qualifies for life due to their income levels and who doesn't. The only time we know that is when the application comes in. So while we were discussing what you had said earlier, I was thinking of a solution, and I think what we can easily do is that first notice, the postcard that goes out to every individual who receives a parking violation citation in this city, we can add a sentence in bold at the bottom or somewhere, which is very clear that this program is available, and then go from there. So in other words, every recipient of a citation knows there is life that is available to them, if they qualify, of course, yeah. And we can do that. I think that would be the easiest and the most, informative way to publicize the program.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that you'll be able to, like, decide or let people know, for one. Obviously, they'd have to notify you and find out if they qualify. And I do think there is an element of staff time to do this, just to get the program up and running, and I'm okay with that because I think it's important, but I think there is an expenditure piece to this for operations of how to, like, operationalize this, so, and I'm willing to try it because I think it's important. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee?
Madam Chair, just one follow-up.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
I kind of alluded that if you didn't pay tickets, I wanted to make sure that you didn't have an arrest warrant out for you, but it doesn't affect your ability to get a driver's license either, does it? Renew that.
In 2016, the governing board approved to decriminalize parking citations, and after that, they absolutely have nothing on your record with respect to getting arrested and or,
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve this item. I think we need a roll call, yes, or do we do voice votes? Okay. All those in, yeah, it's true. Are you sure? I think it's a roll call. Let's do a roll call.
The voice vote, unless it's controversial and may be close, then you do a voice vote.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Anybody abstaining? Sounds like it passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are on to item D. Hi. This is consideration of a resolution requesting approval of amendment number 1. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong ones. My bad. An ordinance amending section 23(5.2) to permit up to 10 small commercial events on the plaza. We have Melissa McDonald, our Parks and Open Spaces Division Director, with us, and we had Councilor Cassett. I believe you pulled this item.
Good, thank you so much. Thank you, Director McDonald, for being here. So I just had a few questions. I know that, do you want to explain what's going on with this process, anybody? Because I know that we're about to have a process here of what's going on with this ordinance, or should I just start talking? All right, I'll just start talking. So I had a couple questions about the licensing process and how individuals get permits for this. Can somebody explain that a little bit more detailed for these smaller commercial events, how that permitting or licensing process would work? For the events. Because it's 10 events and it's a first come, first serve. And so understanding what that process looks like, I think, is one of my hang-ups there. I guess let me give a broader context, and then you can decide how to respond. So if we have 10 per calendar year, and it's on a first come, first serve, I was curious when essentially that application point opens, and then can individuals apply for only the upcoming calendar year? Can they apply for multiple years in a row? How are we balancing out that piece? And then I believe for the larger events, we have to have a 3-month lag time, I believe, and so is that also coming into play here? So essentially, what does this whole application process look like for the events, and how does it align with what we're currently doing?
Madam Chair, Councilor, the permitting process is first come, first serve. This is coming in mid-year, so it would start immediately upon passage for this year, and then we're going to restart it on the calendar year, which is January. And at this point in time, we would receive any interested parties' requests. On a lot of these events, you do want to plan a year in advance, and most of the activities that are on the plaza are typically in the summer, although certainly we have things in the winter. But yeah, it's a first come, first serve. When we get the request, that will be evaluated. You have to fill out an online application. You have to submit a packet of information, and Barb will follow up with you. Barb Lopez will follow up with you.
Thank you. And so comes in online so that you get the timestamp there in case it's on the same day. And then can events apply for multiple years in a row? So can they say, we want to do this on, July the 5th for 2023, 2024, 2025?
Madam Chair, Councilor, no, it's an annual permit, so you would have to do it for this year, for the year that you're wanting the activity.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then would we have to do at least 3 months in advance of the event?
Madam Chair, Councilor, that is correct.
Thank you. I apologize, because PrimeGov is down for us, I have to decipher my chicken scratch as opposed to normally I get to type things out, what computers have done to me. And then I did see that there is a fiscal impact, I believe it was $50,000, am I correct? And,
Madam Chair, Counselor, that is correct.
and how much of that is actual dollars, so $40,000 and then operating $10,000, and so some of it's personnel. I think this is one of our problems with our fiscal impact reports is sometimes are these all new costs? None of these are absorbed costs, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by new costs. These are costs that are permitted, they're posted online so people know what they're going to pay, and when you have an event, we assess what your needs are, and sometimes it's new costs and it's based out of the event. Sometimes there are residual costs that are kind of staff things that we have to do during the day that may take up a little more time than normal, that type of thing.
Okay, so when I'm looking at the expenditures, I'm seeing that it'd be $50,000 a year that would come out of the city's coffers somehow. And so some of those would be reallocating staff time, and some of those would be overtime or new costs?
That's correct.
Okay, do we have an estimate of what that breakdown looks like, or not at this time?
What I think that we believe is that each permit will take 10 hours, and so that's a big part of it. It's administrative time. And then, again, it's estimates because we do need to know what the type and nature of the event is. So if it's a music event, we'll need to have electricians on hand. Sometimes more food-oriented events would have more overtime in terms of trash, things like that. So we do have general breakdowns, but it's dependent on the specific event.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of, so this would start mid-year. Does this mean that events would start in fiscal year 23? Or would we be having any events that would be, well, I guess because you have to have 3 months. We don't have 3 months before the end of the fiscal year, so never mind, moot point. We did just budget, pass the budget, and I'm curious where we believe the $50,000 will come from. Is this something that we will be kind of finding as it comes along? We just hadn't allocated this money, so I'm curious where you'll be able to pull it from.
Madam Chair, Counselor, so on some of these events, we do anticipate that we will have coverage because of the 10 events that we have here, we have been approached by roughly 5 or 6 organizations that we've already planned for. But it depends, if they're all new events, and they get first come, first serve, we're just going to have to see if we plan for those types of activities. We do have fees that go into, that are collected, so we conceivably could come back and ask for that money to be barred into the budget if we do not have enough resources to cover. But again, this is, without knowing what the nature and type of event it is, it's a little bit as they come forward. So we would have preferred to have it a little earlier, but we think we're going to be okay.
Okay. All right. So the departments affected, we have Public Works, which is obviously how that happens, and then Community Services, I'm assuming that's Public Safety. Would that be why we have Community Services? So it should be our Community Health and Safety Department? Is that just a...
Madam Chair, Counselor, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we should change that because, or unless Community Services under Community Health and Safety, would they be impacted at all, or was that just a typo?
Madam Chair, Counselor, I think that's a typo.
Okay, great, thank you. I was sitting there like, what's, like,
I'll double check that. Actually, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. We're really talking about police, fire safety.
Okay, that makes sense to me then. And then what about economic development? What impacts are we seeing to them or expected to see for them?
Madam Chair, Counselor, I'm not sure that economic development is affected by this because it's a process that's kind of from the community, but yes.
Madam Chair, sorry, it's an economic development opportunity to have an event on the plaza, yes?
Yeah.
Right.
PRT revenue.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, I was more just looking at the departments affected on the FIR, and it says the Economic Development Division, and so I was just trying to understand what their role is in this process.
I think, Madam Chair, their role is that they're very supportive of events on the plaza because it really helps with heads in beds and, you know, people in stores. I don't think economic impact necessarily means cost. It can also mean revenue.
I mean, yes, it could, but departments affected, that's, I guess, where I was confused. Is when as I'm reading this, it makes it sound like there's something that Economic Development Division would be doing to initiate, so no.
And they might help to promote an event, possibly. They do get involved in some events as an economic development activity, but they're not like the ones that provide overtime or trash collection or
Right.
Preparation for it, but they very well might get involved in, you know, marketing or support in other ways like that, and they certainly support them from a revenue generation perspective. And so since the FIR is talking about both revenue and expenses, any department affected would be considered on either side of that equation. And so sorry if that's confusing, but that's what it was meant to me. That's why it's there.
Okay. I think, I mean, I think that we do need to have kind of a conversation of what goes into our FIRs because they do vary. Because as I was reading this, is which departments are actually going to be, you know, would be required to do on the ground work. And so public works and community health and safety both make sense, but economic development just felt a little, like I wasn't entirely sure what their role would be.
Yeah, we didn't take it to mean that they would be boots on the ground. It just says affected, and so they are definitely in support of this type of activity. It's a big deal for them, the big events on the plaza.
Okay. So the other question, as long as we're talking about economic development, and Melissa, I'm not sure that you can answer this, or I know sponsors can answer this, and I don't have much information besides some of the responses we got back from the chamber about the concerns of the downtown businesses. And maybe this is more of a question for the sponsors. If you guys had an opportunity to talk to the downtown merchants and understand a little bit more what their concerns are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for answering the finance questions, because I actually think FIRs change every single time we have something different. So just pointing that out. Yes, I've had meetings with various stakeholders, not in full groups, but we are planning on having a full group meeting with the Merchants Association, even though it's not fully active. There's a few people that are involved with that. The chamber is going to be part of that meeting, and we're hoping to have it next week. But I've actually had conversations with them, and people have different opinions. The other thing I want to point out is the folks that work downtown, some of the businesses, they're not a chamber member, or they're not part of the Merchants Association. So I'm trying to hear from a broad swath of folks instead of just assuming that the chamber represents all businesses downtown. And so, yes, I'm going to be meeting with them, and I've talked with them, and I also have talked with the vendor, the plaza vendors and some of the pushcart vendors to let them know about this. And we're also going to have an organized meeting with that. But, you know, things take time to try to organize with meetings to get everybody on the same page. But I think they know about this. There's concerted effort to reach out, and it's been proactive even before this was introduced. So there's just more to, I think there's this always constant communication that needs to happen with stakeholders, and even those that are not part of these organized organizations.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm glad we're having those conversations. I'd heard that somewhere, this is one of those fun rumors that you have to dig around the city for, that there is a report potentially, these mics are, I'm really not used to this, is potentially an economic development somewhere that talked about negative impact or revenue for downtown businesses for events. And have you heard of this report or seen it, or?
I have not seen it. I don't know. I've never even heard of it. I know that there's people that feel that way when they have the larger 8 events, that it potentially takes business away from them, but I don't think you can prove that with facts saying that a business is affected because there's an event that, you know, negatively impacts them when it occurs. I mean, the 8 events that we're talking about that are already in play, you know, there's a lot that's involved with that. Streets being shut down and other implications, and I think that's one of the things I've heard still about those events. I guess the way I envision the smaller events is it's staying on the Plaza Park, it's pertaining to the actual community event that's occurring, and it's very small scale and it's not multiple days. So I just can't imagine how that could negatively impact a community or, sorry, the plaza vendors or even the merchants when that brings people to the plaza. And so maybe it's not their clientele and maybe it is. So I've had this conversation actually today with some of the folks from the chamber, and I think there's more to discuss about that. But I haven't seen a report.
Yeah, that's why I was curious about it. And I also think that there is, my understanding is the perception that it blocks parking, and that's the problem. But if these events are already because right now these events can happen anyhow, they just can't sell. So the parking's already blocked anyway. So I was just curious if there are other concerns besides the parking.
Can you elaborate on blocked parking?
That because there's more people coming downtown for the events, that individuals that might be coming down for other reasons wouldn't be able to find parking, and so therefore they cannot patronize. And so for me, that's why I was curious if that had been part of the conversation and what kind of some of the different issues that came up with, because that one doesn't quite work for me.
Yeah,
These events are already happening, the parking's already going to be blocked, if that is the issue, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel that's kind of an unwarranted concern, and I think all of us that grew up here know that parking is a challenge in general for downtown. And I also know that when someone wants to get to an event, they will find parking. I mean, if you think about even the Zobra, people find parking and get there when they walk. So I think if you think about all the parking we have, and Director Knoll will know this, we have public parking, and there's quite a few options in the downtown area, and if you want to park for free, Para Building is one free parking big lot that people can park. So I don't feel like that issue is the issue that really should be of concern for these small commercial event permits, because they're small anyway, and these are events that typically would have occurred, and people would be coming downtown for those anyways.
Right, yeah, that's what I was curious, because that was my thought. It's already happening. How many events do we have on the plaza in general? Obviously not commercial events, but how often is the Plaza Park?
Madam Chair, Councilor, I don't have the exact number. I apologize. I can find out and get back to you on that at the next meeting. Barb Lopez would have that information, but we do have the 10, these 10 events if we have them, and then the 8 major events, but I don't have that information.
Okay. All right.
On that point, Madam Chair, so just, you said you don't have the number, but we have budgeted for a potential number of events for the year in this budget cycle. And so we do have kind of a guesstimate of how many events occur for the year, not just the 8, but you add in kind of the regular events that potentially would happen. So there is somewhat of an estimate, wouldn't you say?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we do have an estimate. I don't have that breakout in front of me. What I do is I meet with Barb Lopez and we go over what her overall anticipated budgets look like, so I can get that information and let you at the next council meeting or next committee meeting.
Thank you.
And then I guess one additional question, back to the process for people applying on that first come, first served basis. We did have, AMP came and spoke at the public comment. They have multiple events on the plaza. So could one individual or one organization that's having multiple events, I mean, if they get their application in first and they have 10 events on the plaza throughout the year, can they take up all the events?
Madam Chair, Counselor, no, you have to have an individual permit for each one, so, but I think that would not be allowed.
Okay, so if they put in 10 permit applications in, and
Yeah.
you were the first one, we would say, no, you can only, do we need to change something in there too? Probably.
That's a good point. And I'm not sure because AMP has multiple events, right? Concerts, the bandstand series. So I guess I thought bandstand was one event. I mean, one application. So we probably have to figure that out.
Madam Chair, Counselor, this, in the ordinance, it talks about one event per day. So those events would not qualify for this, in my opinion, but I'll do a little more thinking and speak with Barb about that. But I believe that that would not qualify for the small commercial events because it is not multiple days, it's one day.
Right, but if they could put in 10, at this moment, they could take up all 10 days if they happen to get their applications in first. Of how this is written at this moment.
Madam Chair, Counselor,
Maybe.
it's possible, and what I'll do is I'll go back and speak with Barb administratively. I think that can be handled, but that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm having a hard time is with how we, with the first come, first serve of the events and what those requirements are for somebody who is coming in and having a small commercial event. I think that's the part that I'm kind of hung up on, and so I know that that's something that we're all kind of chewing on a little bit more, and that there will be more conversation about. So I will leave it at that. But that's also the other one that I'd be concerned of is that if somebody could come in and have multiple events, because we don't want it to just benefit one organization. I believe that the purpose behind this is to provide more opportunities for a variety of different organizations or event organizers. Am I correct in that that is the spirit of the proposal?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Cassett, I think you bring up a good point, and I'd like to find out how AMP actually applies for their events, because I thought I'm curious about how they apply.
Okay.
Because they have multiple days of the bandstand, they take different days, but the permitting is different. Is it for each day of the event?
Madam Chair, Counselor, I do want to follow up with our permitting folks to look at that, but my sense is that that's considered a multi-day permit versus an individual day permit, and this is really about individual days and not over the course of, but I do need to find that out. I'm not sure how they particularly do that.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize. I normally try to send you guys questions in advance, and I'm behind on that this week. So, sorry, I'm surprising you with questions today. I don't believe I have any other questions at this time. Thank you.
You want to go, or do you want me to go? Councilwoman, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you envision. Why did you bring this bill? What is it you're wanting for the plaza, and what do you think this enables, and what's the vision behind the legislation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also want to include my vision is not necessarily my personal vision. It's incorporating people that have asked me about this over the years of serving on the council. And from what I've heard from organized groups or events or concerts is that they like to be able to have vendors to enhance the event. And when I say enhance the event, right now vendors, they're not allowed for any regular community events. So if a group wants to sell a T-shirt, they can't do it. If they want to sell some kind of small, already prepackaged meal, not meal, but food item, they can't do it. If there's any kind of crafts associated with the event, they can't do it. So we were trying to figure out ways to allow for having small vendors for community events that already are existing, mostly to be able to support the small business aspect of these events. There's been groups that feel like they don't want to just have events to be for entertainment value only, that they want to be able to have community members who actually work and live and play in our city be recognized also as having small businesses and be able to be shown for that. So I think that the one way to enhance it was to be able to like uplift our local businesses in a way that, you know, highlights the event while also highlighting people to be able to sell vendors. So when we think about how they could work in conjunction, we think about, like, say, Juneteenth, it's very much supporting the Black community and extending beyond that, yet they want to be able to be visible for the people that actually sell goods and wares that are related to Black culture. So how do we do that? We don't have a mechanism to do that. And according to the attorneys, the only way to do that is to create this kind of another, I don't love that ordinance. I mean, it's kind of confusing already, the plaza ordinance, but then the only way to be able to amend it is to codify it with a small commercial event permit option. So I think that's what, from what I've heard, community members trying to enhance their event and supporting entrepreneurial businesses associated with that event. I don't know if the co-chair, co-sponsor wants to say anything.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. The reason that I supported this is when I was the fire chief, we had a family fun day, and it was at the plaza. And it was a completely free event, free food. We partnered up with Christus. We partnered up with community organizations, and people came down, set up tables. We had a dunking booth. You could dunk the chief for a small amount of, I think it was free. Even that was free. So the whole thing, and you know, kids could climb on ladders and climb on fire trucks and jump in the ambulances and get blood pressure checks and do all that. 100% completely free event, and it was the inaugural year that we started it, and it was a great event. Brought many people out, you know, was supported by all except for the downtown merchants. And since then, it's never been at the plaza again, and the Family Fun Day has never been the same since that initial time. And bringing people for a free event to the plaza is something that I think should be available to everyone. It's a park for a community, for people that not only visit here, but people that live here. And that was one way that we thought of getting community people back to the park, and it was a huge success, but it wasn't liked by all, so it stopped after that. So that's why I'm in support of this. I think for organizations like that, if the fire department decided to try that again, or anybody else, I think, again, it should be a park for everybody, and I think those would bring a different group of people to the park.
Okay, so now I'm a little confused. Family Fun Day would have vendors, or no? It would just be
It could, but it wouldn't have to.
And you can't do that now?
It's my understanding, and again, this happened when I was there and then left after that, the reason that they didn't allow it was because of complaints from the Merchants Association.
Okay, because I guess, so I've got a whole bunch of questions here now. So my understanding was that a lot of the people who've been approaching you, Councilor Villarreal, are people who are already doing events on the plaza. They would just like, and you keep using the word enhance, they would just like to have the ability to sell things on the plaza. And so that's really the thing that's not, they can't do right now unless we change the ordinance. But you, Councilor Rivera, this Family Fun Day, I think, could still happen. You just, unless you wanted to sell things. So
I think that would be an option if they did. I mean, even if the fire department wanted to sell T-shirts or do something like that.
Yeah, and maybe offset the cost of it being free. That confuses me a little bit. But Councilwoman Villarreal, you had also mentioned, so you used two different words. You used local businesses and entrepreneurial businesses. Are you thinking about criteria for these vendors? Like, should they have a business license in the city? Are they just like, I'm at home making T-shirts and I'm affiliated with the community organizers and I just want to, or I'm making really neat crafts, but I don't have a business license, but I'm affiliated with a community group, so I'm going to have a vending booth and make a little cash. Like, have you thought about that piece?
Yes, and actually that was, it's already in the ordinance now that when you do any vending, you actually have to get business licenses for anybody that's going to be selling on the plaza.
Okay.
And the organizer would be responsible. They actually do it now. They have to go to our business license office and put all the names of the businesses and make sure they have business licenses. They do it as a group process, and everybody has to get approved that way instead of every individual going in. But that ensures that they have business licenses, and two, that they're going to be, they have to sign off saying they're going to be paying gross receipts tax.
Okay, and then I guess in your vision, is it local businesses or is it entrepreneurial business? I mean, are you trying to target anybody in particular, or encourage?
Well, I think
target might be the wrong word. Encourage.
Madam Chair, I think what I've heard from folks that are interested in this program is that they want to be able to support, and I say entrepreneurial and local business kind of synonymous in this case, but that they want people that actually live in the city or county, probably, because not everyone can live in the city, but that they would really be emphasizing the local component of it, so that people are actually seeing folks that not just want to entertain for entertainment value, but they actually have something else to offer other than just entertainment. So showing wares, showing businesses, I think Mr. Ahmad talked about that, people that have books related to Black culture or jewelry related to Black culture, that they would be able to sell for that day for Juneteenth. And I'm just giving you that example because I have had multiple conversations about that. I've also heard about that from like Indigenous Peoples Day, being able to have that event and not just have it as a tourist event where it's just for entertainment value, but they would be able to incorporate some vendors, local vendors. And again, it would be up to the organizer to kind of distinguish that and go through the process of accepting vendors. We wouldn't be scrutinizing all of those pieces. We don't do that now.
And so when you picked 10, why 10?
That was suggested by the attorney's office based on Barbara's kind of just a guesstimate of how many organizations or groups have inquired about having vendors, and she guesstimated around 30, although when I asked her today, she said she thought it was less. But just I think over the years, folks that had asked, so it was kind of around 30, she said, of organizations that have inquired, so 10 was kind of like a middle point, and then we also had the 4 or 5 that have inquired that are currently having events that would be wanting to do that in the future.
So what happens if those few groups, those 5 that you, I think, really care about, or that want to lead off with, what happens if they don't get down there fast enough and get the 10? Are we just creating a fight?
Well, we were talking about the process, because I know some of my colleagues aren't okay with the first come, first permitted, and what we could do to kind of equitably provide the possibility of getting an event that would allow for vendors. And I guess Barbara and I were talking about how we do that with waivers right now. And it's, again, at the beginning of the year, people would have to request, at the beginning of the calendar year, would have to request that they'd like to have vendors for their event. And they would have to know in January that they were going to be having an event later on in the year. So unless you all think of another option, I just think if we're starting at the beginning of the year and having it first come, first permitted, it does, if someone's not organized, they may not get it. But I think if folks are committed to this and they're wanting to have vendors, that they would be proactive in doing so.
Yeah, I just worry, leadership changes in these groups, and sometimes you have really organized organizers, and they're on it, and they know what to do, and they get there on the day that they're supposed to, and that's fine. But then, you may have one of the groups that I know you care about, maybe have a problem with meeting the deadline, and then they get out, and then they, cry foul because they didn't get there in time. I don't know. I have a real problem with the first come, first serve. I think it's something we need to think about and talk about a little bit more, but we can do that.
I guess I'd be open to figuring out a better process that's equitable.
Yeah.
And, first come, first permitted was actually suggested by the attorney's office.
Okay.
So that's not really my language, but I'm just
Okay.
willing to be able to try to, people would have to be on top of their organizing anyway, if they have to be 3 months in advance preparing for something, so.
Yeah. Okay, this is helpful. I think there's some things that we can do to improve this, and I think Councilor Lindell had some questions as well. I kind of jumped in front of her, sorry.
Yeah, I would say, thank you, Chair. First of all, I don't think we should be discussing this tonight. This is at Finance. This is supposed to come to Finance last. Counselor, you said you've been working on this since January. I just don't understand why we are not following our procedural rules with this. I don't know why we're talking about this, why this is at Finance tonight.
Yeah, Counselor, can I help with that? So I think we discussed that with the city attorney while she was here. And as a courtesy to the sponsor, I suggested that she wanted to hear kind of what some of the questions were, wanted an opportunity to talk about what she was trying to do. And I think what we agreed is that we will bring this back to Finance at the next meeting we have, which is before it goes to governing body on June 8th. So that's why I think, there's an opportunity for us to talk some more, maybe bring some amendments. And that, I think, when is our next meeting?
Madam Chair, on that point about the procedural pathway,
Yep.
Erin did explain to us about that reasoning of why Finance wasn't last and the steps that it needs to take in terms of the publishing. And frankly, when I think about our procedural rules, it doesn't capture these nuances that we need to think about for them, not just publishing, but things that they have to put in the paper at a certain time. And that's the point that I think was hard for me, because I didn't understand that process.
Yeah, so,
I have the floor here.
yeah, sorry.
If this has been being worked on since January, this doesn't hold water for me. It's way too long. And we've jumped everything up, and now we got to jump up a committee because we have to publish. This is since January. This isn't right.
It wasn't since January that this was complete. We've been talking and figuring out language since January, but it actually came to a head when we hit budget hearings and it wasn't introduced and wasn't, staff-wise, there was some stuff. So.
Well, let me say, as far as budget goes, this should have been in the budget. We have a resolution that requires that we identify a funding source, and we didn't budget for this. Secondly, I agree. I think that 10 events is too many. That's with the 8 that we have now. That puts us into 4.5 months, every weekend, an event. and I think that's a lot. I think that's a lot to ask of staff. It's always overtime, and I just think that that's too many events. You said you've met with downtown stakeholders. Hopefully we'll hear what they have to say. In the existing ordinance, the section 23-5.2E talks about that the events are only, permits are only granted to nonprofits. I'm assuming that we're sticking with the existing ordinance unless there is specifically a statement that we're not.
At this point, it's only nonprofits that have inquired about this. So I think we need to explicitly state that, though, because right now, the way it's stated, that's just nonprofits for regular community events that are non-commercial. So we'll have to add that in.
So are we saying that the rest of the only part that applies to these small commercial is that section of the ordinance, and all the other parts of this ordinance do not apply to it?
The way it's written in now, I think there's some things that we'll need to move down to make sure that it's clear, like the 3-month process. The same process that we have as above, will probably, I think we need to repeat it and actually say it under the small commercial section.
I think that would be a really good idea. How many booths do we, are we going to fill the plaza, or do we have a limit on the number of booths?
Currently, we don't have limits on the booth numbers. I've asked Barbara about numbers. It depends on how you set up. I've seen 40 on there. I've seen smaller where there's still a lot of space to dance or do whatever. I think it's going to depend. Did you want to say something?
Madam Chair, Councilor, yeah, this ordinance is asking for us to stay within the perimeter of the plaza because there are different sizes of tents and setups, but the organizations that do apply are going to be submitting in advance their layouts, and Barbara's going to have a lot of control over those booth setups. So we do feel that that will be something that we can handle. If I may take a moment, just this previous conversation about how to deal with organizations. I mean, we do know that there's 5 or 6 organizations that are interested in this, and other places in this ordinance, it really calls out very specific things. So the governing body may want to consider, do you want to actually create a criteria or name organizations like with an equity lens, however you think it would be appropriate. That might be, you know, a way to do this. Or we could be like the public schools and do a lottery. And that way we don't have the situation where one person or one organization could take up 10 days. And I do also want to clarify that with the overtime, I do think it's going to really depend on what type of event. So another lens we might look at is, do we want to have a number of day events and a number of evening events? Evening events take a lot more effort for our staff. So there could be ways to look at this. That's my understanding of what this process is. And if you look at this section in the code, it is very specific in certain areas. So I think you have a lot of flexibility in terms of crafting it, in my opinion.
Thank you. One thing, Councilor Villarreal, that you spoke about tonight that I hope that gets included in this is you talked about relating the event to the culture and highlighting people related to the event. I hope that we will have some criteria for who the vendors are, and that it's not just an open call to, oh, you want to sell on the plaza this weekend? Well, we got some booths open. Come on down and sell. I hope that there's criteria. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Councilor. Sorry, I was just thinking about what we talked about, open call, but I would need to, I'm just curious if this ends up being something that we put in the ordinance. and how to distinguish that. Open call versus vendors that are associated with the actual community event. So I don't have the answer to that. I'm hoping that other folks would have a way to not be micromanaging, but also, yeah, obviously we want it to be connected to that event, because that's the whole point.
Well, that's my point, is I hope that we would have some criteria. And all of these, what they do is to tell me that this still, the way this reads at this moment in time, it needs a fair amount of revision and addition. I don't see that it needs so much subtraction, but it needs some addition. I would chime in very clearly that I think first come, first served is not good policy, and that it will lead to problems in the future, a lot of problems. I heard you say tonight about vendors being local. I think that that's terrific. I hope that that would be put into this ordinance. Additionally, when you were saying other parts of the ordinance need to be brought down into this, one of the main ones would be to the section where you need to have a site plan within 3 months and a final site plan within a month. I think it's really important. Otherwise, this will come down on staff 6 days before an event. They go, oh, we're going to have vendors. That's not fair. So I would hope that that part of the existing ordinance gets duplicated into this part of the ordinance. It seems like with the number of events that we're talking about potentially having, which I don't support 10, that part needs to be moved in. So those are the things that and I did send most of these to you, that need to be addressed. Thank you, Chair.
Councilor Rivera.
In light of all the questions and the discussion we had with the city attorney earlier, I'd like to make a motion to postpone this till our next meeting and give opportunity to address some of the issues and concerns that have come up tonight.
Second?
Councilor Cassett, sorry.
Thank you. Regarding schedule, and I apologize that I did not catch this at introduction, because this would have been the appropriate time to do this. I feel like this would be worthwhile to send to EDAC, but the problem is that it would not hit EDAC until the day that it is currently scheduled for governing body, and so that doesn't really give a lot of time for EDAC to provide comments about, and then for us to be able to really act on it. But a committee would have to refer it to EDAC, so we could just send it, knowing that we wouldn't have as much time, but could still get some information. And I'm a little bit torn on what to do here. And if it is possible that this does not have to be passed at the June 8th, thank you, meeting, I would actually request that it also be sent to the Economic Development Advisory Committee, because they could actually have some input that might be beneficial. Is there a reason that June 8th has, that we're targeting that date? I know that there was a lot of conversation, and that's why it was introduced, not at governing body, but at another time. So I'm curious about that possibility.
That's a good question, and I like that suggestion. Initially, the pathway, the scheduling, took this to be approved at governing body in May. So it was going to be on track to try to capture those events in June, the 2 events that we're considering vendors, small vendors. And now it came back to us with another date, and it was June 8th. And so that really doesn't give much time for events that happen in June to get all that they need in place, although I think that they would probably try to do that, but I think that the time frame is off now. And so now I think we may be able to add EDAC into the mix.
Okay, and follow-up. We also were discussing that they had to apply 3 months in advance, so they wouldn't have been able to do June anyway, even if we passed it in May. What am I missing?
Initially, we weren't thinking about the 3 month, but I think in talking with staff, it made sense to do the 3 months.
So at this point,
Actually, let me retract that. The groups that are wanting to do this have been already in conversation with putting their event together and the potential of having vendors, but it's not in place right now. So I think that the 3 month would still apply because they're still going to be doing an event and putting together. It's just the vendor piece, I think, would have added, you're right, a whole nother layer of like trying to figure this out.
yeah.
The timing, yeah, I think that was a misstep.
Okay. So if this is going to be coming back to finance on May 30th, I apologize, but we have to take a vote on that before we could even talk about EDAC, so I jumped the gun. But would it, I would be really interested in sending this to EDAC. So let's take a vote on the finance one, and then I will make a motion. Sorry.
Okay, I'm just reading our new rules. So I don't know how to get out of this jam. This basically says if we have the right to postpone this till our next meeting, but in so doing, it stops its progress. So if we do that, that solves. Well, and we should have gone to finance last, according to our rules. So we shouldn't really even be talking about it here. So now I don't know how to get out of this jam.
What if I redacted my motion and restated it to include a change in schedule moving forward?
Well, or maybe if you just say that it should come back to finance as per our rules. The finance should be the last committee that hears this. So
Whichever you think is most appropriate.
I think we should try that one, that we'll bring it, that we're going to honor we heard it here as a courtesy to the sponsor because the sponsors asked to hear kind of some preliminary conversation, but we acknowledged at the front of the meeting that it should have come here last. And so we're just bringing it back after the other committees hear it in the order that the rules dictate.
Okay, so I'll adjust my motion to specify that it comes to Finance Committee last.
I don't know what to do about EDAC.
Madam Chair, just curious, when's the next EDAC meeting?
June 8th. So technically what it should have done is hit EDAC on June 8th. The following week, it should have hit, well, then it should have probably gone because it's going Public Works, Utilities, and then Finance. So what it should have done is EDAC on June 8th, Public Works, Utilities on whatever the next one, that would have been Finance. I mean, and it probably would have hit Governing Body come July, I believe is what that pathway should have looked like. If we're already missing those, can we go ahead and just correct course now and go through the usual standard of the committee processes?
I think we might as well take advantage of that now that the path has gone like this, based on procedure rules and
Adventures and new
confusion.
procedure rules.
Okay,
Or what would be the
so
motion?
I guess the rule is, the motion is that this bill should move through the committees as per our rules, which would make it go to EDAC, and also it would come to finance last for any action.
Madam Chair, I don't know if EDAX is not part of our procedure rules, but I think it is part of our procedure rules. Also,
We have that it says that it goes to any advisory committees prior to hitting the governing body committee, or the council committees.
okay, thanks for the clarification.
But that's not what's going to happen. Because it's going to hit the other two council committees before it goes to EDAC.
I thought that the motion was that it would go EDAC June 8th, public utilities on, oh, I don't have that on my calendar.
So it would just delay.
It hit public utilities, I believe that would be on June 27th, finance, July 5th, governing body, July 13th would be the path.
All right, well, we don't really need to know, we just need, I mean, are the sponsors okay with? I mean, basically, it would mean waiting for EDAC and then going through all the committees and then the governing body.
I think it would be helpful, so then we can have those community meetings and stakeholder meetings and clear up any misconceptions and get feedback, because those are already being scheduled as follow-ups, and then that'll give us more time to work out some of the amendments.
This is when it would be good to have the city attorney's office here, because the other thing is, maybe we don't take any action on this. Just leave it alone. We just didn't take action on it.
I was told by the city attorney's office that we do have to refer it to EDAC if we want it to go to EDAC.
Okay.
We have to refer it there, but it's not required by our rules, right?
It is, you said.
Well, because we already went down the wrong path, and this is where I say, this is what I should have noticed, being chair of EDAC, when this was introduced, I should have said, hey guys, I'd like to send this to EDAC, and then made a motion then to change the path. So
I think, okay, so maybe the motion should be that the bill go to EDAC and then the council committees in the order in which the rules provide, which means that it'll go to Public Works, Quality of Life, Finance. It'll go to EDAC, Public Works, Quality of Life, Finance. Is that not where it's going?
it's not on the list, but I would love for it to be, I mean, if we can have that conversation. So maybe if we say
Well,
that
just,
I think we'd have to clarify this with staff, because, I don't know all the ins and outs of new procedures and also publishing dates and what needs to go here and there. So I think we need to go back to staff and to understand the right pathway. Given what we just talked about, though, the majority of the meetings will take place in June.
so how about the motion be that we honor the order of committees laid out in the procedural rules?
And then EDAC would just be a consideration, or?
EDAC, that's where it'll start, is at EDAC.
it's part of the procedural rules because it'd be the relevant advisory committee.
If you brought it up at introduction, which didn't happen.
If I had brought it up at introduction, I would have said, hey, guys, this should be going to EDAC as it is an economic, if we're saying that's economic development, it should have gone there. That is the advisory committee where this should have gone through.
So now it's just up to us as a sponsors as a courtesy to send it there.
We could vote, actually. So I am requesting, but we could, and that's why I was asking if there was a time frame, I wasn't going to make the motion. If they were saying we need to pass it on June 8th because of X, Y, Z. But it sounds like that is no longer the situation, so that we do have the ability to take the time and, draw upon the expertise that is in EDAC.
I mean, I actually would like to hear from EDAC. I think it would be good to, they're just a recommending entity. It's not like they affect our process, but it would be good and a courtesy for folks that are working on related to economic And, well, as we say, commerce, in this case, this is supporting commerce, so I think it's fine.
Okay,
Do you want me to make a motion with the actual dates of the path? Or no?
sure.
I've got it set. So, like if it goes to quality of life.
Well, one of the issues is the notice requirement, that it has to pass a committee before it can go to governing body, but there's an issue with, it has to be noticed, and so,
And we talked about that with the procedural rules.
yeah, and there's some, I don't know, this is why it would be helpful to have the city attorney's office here. So, I just think it just needs to follow the path laid out in the procedural rules, which means it'll go to the relevant advisory committee, then it'll go to wherever it's going, and it'll end in finance, and then go to governing body. And being that EDAC isn't meeting until June 8th, that's where it'll start, and then it'll all fall from there.
Second.
Clear as mud for the staff, I bet. And this is just a voice vote? I've sent an email to the city clerk asking for clarification on voice votes, so we're going to do a voice vote. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right. Sorry, that was painful. But we're going to learn from it. That's the good news. Okay, so back to our consent agenda. We are on item A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. Request for approval of 5-year agreement to waive fees between the City of Santa Fe and Bienvenidos. And who pulled this?
Me.
Okay, Councilor Kasich.
No, I apologize. Had I known, I would not have pulled this tonight. I had a couple quick questions. The amount that they cap at, has that always been enough to cover the entirety of the program?
Madam Chair, Councilor Kasich, yes, that is correct.
Wonderful, thank you. And then my other question had to do with, it says that it started in mid-April, but we obviously will not be passing this for another couple of weeks. So have they already been parking and paying for the last month?
No, the program currently is getting validated in anticipation of this getting passed.
Okay, okay. And then I had another question that I realize is completely irrelevant, so I do apologize, and I will move for approval.
I actually have.
We have a couple more questions, but you can move for approval, and is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second and we have a motion and a second, but we have more questions from Councilwoman Villarreal, and Councilor Rivera also pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what did you say, Noel, that would cover the costs for this? Waiving the fees of parking?
Yes, so we have an annual amount of $6,552 not to exceed. So in other words, the cost of the validations for a 12-month period would be $6,552.
So I guess I'm wondering, in terms of amount, how do you offset that when, as we were talking about, it wasn't budgeted for the year?
Oh, sure, please.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thank you for the question. Actually, it's an exchange of services, so Bienvenidos staffs our tourism booth, so it's really quite valuable to the city to provide the parking, and this has been in place for years. So it's not a budget issue, really. It's a fair value for an exchange.
This is a what is it called? We've had this in the past, and we're re-initiating it. What is the word? I'm getting tired. We had this in place before, correct?
Yes, Councilor, and this is just an ongoing renewal.
Renewal, that was the word I was looking for. Sorry. Okay, so then my question is, do we need an FIR for this?
No.
Contract. It's a contract, so we don't need an FIR?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Villarreal, yes, actually, the fiscal impact's quite clear on a contract, right? It's spelled out here that this is the value, it's not to exceed this amount. When you have a bill, there isn't necessarily language in the bill that talks about amounts, which is why an FIR is an important accompaniment, but the contract itself tells you the fiscal impact.
Okay, so it's, because it's a contract, it doesn't require resolution or anything like that?
Correct.
I'm trying to remember. I guess I don't remember when this was.
And actually, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, this wouldn't even normally come to the governing body at this size, but there is, in our statutes, it requires that intergovernmental agreements like MOUs and those kinds of things, they do come, and also waiving and changing of fees, right? So our established parking fee is being waived, and so those types of things do have to come regardless of the amount.
Okay. And this, when was this initiated again? Do you remember how long ago we?
To my best knowledge, it's been at least for 15 years.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilor Rivera?
Is this the only facility or visitor center that we have downtown that's going to be, or at the rail yard that's going to be taking advantage of?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the only location is going to be the Sandoval Garage.
All right. So do we have a visitor center at rail yard?
Not that I know of, no.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, it actually was in the depot, if you remember, and the depot's in remodel right now.
Okay.
But now also the downtown restrooms are about to open, which will have so that's really all managed by Randy Randall, and we're working closely with him, but we haven't worked out all the details. But at this point, we've got the one downtown. They'll be parking at Sandoval, and there's another maybe, but there was one at the rail yard, and we're looking at sort of what the whole landscape looks like.
So right now we're looking at a 5-year agreement for only the visitor center on the plaza.
And that is correct, and this renewal is based upon the previous contracts that have been identical, always at the Sandoval Garage for this specific location.
So once the new facility opens up, where the restrooms are at, will this have to come back? Will it be terminated and come back for additional parking requirements?
No, that definitely would be an entirely different aspect, a new contract if necessary. This is exclusively for the volunteer tourist information booth at the plaza.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, on that point, the other visitor centers are staffed by us, by the city staff. That's the difference. This one has volunteers only, but if they were to add volunteers, they would probably have to look at supporting this bigger.
Okay, Councilor Rivera, anything else?
No, thank
All
you.
right, is there a motion? Oh, you did? Oh, you did. Oh, God, okay. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, then we go back to GH. Item H was pulled by Councilor Cassett. A request for approval of a budget amendment in the amount of $205,000 to cover lease payments due for the LED street light and solarization project. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I'm just trying to understand, so my understanding is that we did not get all of the equipment installed. Can you let me know which equipment is behind on installation? Yeah, I think these are more Regina questions than.
Well, I am here. Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett. Actually, so the purchase order was finally issued to the entity in September of 2021 to install all these systems. And luckily enough, even before sort of the big supply chain issues, they took the steps to purchase all of our equipment. So we have all the panels and all the racking. The Buckman Direct Diversion Array is being built on U.S. Forest Service land, and so we've just been at the mercy of the Forest Service and their permitting process. We believe, so there's no equipment installed because U.S. Forest Service hasn't finalized our access to their land. So we have all the racking, we have all the modules, all the inverters, all the interconnection equipment. We expect and hope and plan to have the U.S. Forest Service permit within the next month and be able to start installation and complete that in about 8 weeks.
Okay, so it sounds like these have been delays that have been out of our hands, so they're not, and it wasn't supply chain, we actually have the equipment.
Well, that's the good news, because if you wanted to buy a solar panel right now, you can't with all the money in the world, even about 3 months ago. So we're really lucky that our vendor was just really proactive and got it. They've completely held the price. We have all the equipment on hand, and BDD will end up with approximately an additional megawatt of solar. We have installed a bunch of our other solar arrays too. Probably about 6 of them are installed and getting ready for interconnection. And we'll save a total of $700,000 a year with this year-out part of the project, the solar, and not counting the streetlights.
Okay, thank you. And so do we expect for everything to be installed in time for our next lease payment so that we will not have to have another bar? We should
We're hoping.
Savings?
We're going as fast as we can.
On that point, it takes time. It'll take, the thing was designed so 6 months of energy savings will make a 6-month debt service payment. If that equipment isn't installed on day one of that 6-month payment period, we will be back and asking for an additional funds.
And when is the next 6-month payment? Is it on a calendar basis?
It's on a calendar basis,
Okay,
so this is June 1st, it'll be December 1st.
Okay, well, good to know. Those were my only questions. I will yield the floor. Thank you.
I think you're the only one who has this. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second? All those in favor, yes?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, we are on to, and that passes. Item H, or no, I. We were on H, now we're on I. This is our last one. Sorry to keep our fire chief and Nathan Miller's here with Wildland Superintendent. Request for approval of an agreement with the United States Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, Santa Fe National Forest, with no fiscal impact, increased capacity of services provided to USFS for Forest Service burns. And I believe there were a number of people who pulled this: Councilor Cassett, Councilor Villarreal, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Lindell. So I don't know, why don't we just start down the, Councilor Rivera, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Nathan and Chief, for hanging with us all this time. Really just wanted, with everything going on around us, can you just give an explanation of what this is, what it does, what it means?
So what this does is it allows us to have the ability of going out and assisting and being able to recuperate funds that we put out, basically salaries. We can get equipment rates and additional monies to come back to the city for our services that we provide.
Does this in any way give our approval to assist or help with burns that the Forest Service does, and I mean control burns?
By moving forward with this agreement, it does not mandate us to anything to do that.
Okay, so this is really just for reimbursement if you're called to help, for example, at the while the fire's on either side of it.
So for an example of this, Councilor Rivera, going out when we assisted with the burns in the watershed earlier this year, we would be able to submit reimbursements for the hours worked on that incident to the Forest Service, and then they would pay us back for that.
Okay. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
Oh, my microphone just.
I thought you said, well, like you were going to ask something. All right, just wanted to make sure. That's all I thought it was, Madam Chair, but just wanted to make sure. I think a lot of the public have read this and think that we're going to start burning up places around the city.
And just to clarify, this is not just for prescribed fire. This is to assist with thinning projects and fuel reductions within the Santa Fe National Forest around the city areas as well.
Which we don't initiate. Those are initiated by the Forest Service, correct? Okay. But if they request our help, this gives us the ability to do it and to get reimbursed for it.
Yes, sir.
So they can initiate a prescribed burn without our approval, correct, in the Forest Service, but this just gives us the ability that if they ask for help, to go up there and assist.
Correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're saying, I just want to repeat that again, that the Forest Service can initiate a prescribed burn without our consent, or the City of Santa Fe Fire Department consent, or the Wildland Fire Team consent?
To my knowledge, as long as it is on the Forest Service federal property, yes.
On the Forest Service property. But if it's on our property, which is the watershed, I thought we could, I guess, say more about that, if it's on our...
Well, it wasn't necessarily on the watershed, it was around the watershed to protect it, for the initial one we were talking about. I would have to do some research to clarify that, whether or not, they could just initially do it without our approval.
I think they
Or
have to have
support, I would
consent,
say.
right? You don't-
I don't know right now. I could not answer that, sorry.
I think the issue, not with this particular agreement, but the reason why it's heightened is that the protocols did not work for this last prescribed burn in the Vegas area. And I guess, I don't know if you all know, but there's probably going to be more of an investigation and scrutiny on that. So do you know if you're considering looking at different protocols that the Forest Service will be following for prescribed burns, given the Hermit's Peak fire?
I cannot answer that based on Forest Service protocols on what they could be doing or looking at.
So they haven't talked to, you all haven't been hearing anything about that?
No.
But there is going to be an investigation around that? That's what I've heard from
I have not heard that, and I cannot answer to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
I heard it from a federal congressperson saying that there'll be, and maybe even in the governor, that they do be looking at an investigation of protocols for the Forest Service as this moves forward. So I think things are going to have to change with prescribed burns, and obviously what this request is not connected to that piece, but I just want to make that known that I've been hearing about that since this fire. And I think that's all I have for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Lindell.
My questions have been asked. Thank you.
Councilor Cowsett.
Questions have been asked, thank you.
So I have a quick question. What happens if we were not to approve this? What would happen? So you're saying the biggest thing is that it allows us to be reimbursed, but would it also mean that we would not be helping them with any kind of work that they're doing, and that could be maybe detrimental?
So, Madam Chair, what we've done in the past is we've helped them just on our normal days. So with Nathan Miller being here for the last 12 months, we've found some ways to reimburse us. So when we've got them in the watershed in the past, we've just eaten the cost in the fact of we're just there to help. We're here to do the best we can. We hired the Wildland Division to do this kind of work. So we don't have to ask for this. We are just they're willing to reimburse us for these costs that we normally would just, part of our day operation, we would just go up there and help these people work out every day. So that's how we've done it in the past. over Nathan being here in the last 12 months, that's how we've changed. We've tried to make it better and trying to say, okay, we'll go up there and help, but then he can ask for reimbursement on the back end and start recouping some of the costs.
So the big piece here is that we're getting reimbursed. It's not that we wouldn't be doing the work, it's just that we haven't been being reimbursed. So that's the key piece, correct?
Correct, Madam Chair. And also, we're also to be able to go up there and watch and be part of the team instead of us, if we don't have a say in those burns, at least we're going up there and letting Nathan go up there and he's seeing what they're doing and we can have some say in it. And in other ways, if we're just saying we're staying out of it and they still want to do it, we won't have that ability for me to at least have somebody to go watch or say, this isn't safe, or Nathan can have that conversation. So it's kind of a double-edged sword to try to help with what we can.
And I think in an email today, you mentioned it's also a training opportunity for our people up there, participating up there. Can you elaborate on that?
Madam Chair, so in the evenings or in the, not in the evenings, in the off hours or like in the wintertime, these guys don't have as much to do. So we could go up there in the December and January and do these trainings, and they can start getting quals to be more qualified when we do have these big fires and we can send more people to the fires. Because as of right now, we only have 4 engine bosses that can work out there. So if the state forestry calls us and those 4 people aren't available, then we can't send our people out there to assist. So it's able to get better qualifications, and now that we have permanent wildland employees in the wintertime, they can go out there and do those kind of projects.
I mean, and so all that said, I mean, there is a safety net or an element of protecting Santa Fe with the work that you're doing and getting reimbursed for it.
Yes, Madam Chair. Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We've been doing it for years. So, one of these have gone bad. It went bad. But we've been doing prescribed burns in Santa Fe for the last probably 10 to 12 years since Councilor Rivera's been here as a chief. We've been doing these burns. They've been coming in here. They usually have the right RH, relative humidity and all the right concepts to have these burns. Sometimes they get them right, and this one they didn't get right. So those are the conversations where you give and take. But yes, that's what it comes down to.
And you may not be the person to ask this question, but since you're here and, probably more qualified than any of us, I'm just curious, so I think winds played a big role in this controlled burn getting out of control and wreaking havoc on the state. What kind of factors of climate change and changing conditions? I mean, obviously this spring we're seeing winds like we've never seen before. How is the kind of changing landscape, changing climate, changing, environment in which these burns are conducted factored in? Is that above your pay grade?
Sure. I'm going to refer this to Wildland Superintendent Nathan Miller. He saw a lot of big difference in this fire. He's seen stuff that he's never seen before. He said they compared them to the Santa Ana winds in California.
Yeah.
So I'll let him.
So, Madam Chair, on that note, the conditions that we're seeing right now are just never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
The winds are crazy. They're higher speeds than what we've seen here in New Mexico for a sustained amount of time. Temperatures are up. I mean, in this part of May, we're not used to seeing, 3 to 5% RHs. We're used to seeing maybe, 15, roughly here and there. Not used to seeing, I think they said, and roughly about 35 out of the last 45 days have been red flag days in the state, and that's also unheard of. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of changing in the weather that's, creating havoc on this fire that we are having here, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so it's not necessarily the fact that it was a controlled burn, but it's kind of some environmental factors that we are not accustomed to.
And Madam Chair, just some things around that is, the weather wasn't accurately predicted for the area that they were in, is my understanding, and because of a rock cliff that they were by. So winds were erratic and weren't able to be seen, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Thank you for indulging me. Councilwoman Villarreal.
The way you describe that is basically not just the weather, it's climate change. It's funny how we don't even say it. The newspapers haven't talked about it, but it's climate change. And so when I think about that, and I'm assuming you all will, I guess, when it comes to the point where it's affecting, when you all are going to start being involved, protocol does have to change based on how our weather patterns and climate change are shifting, and therefore we have to, I think the protocols are going to have to change. And it's not, I know you don't set those protocols, but that's what I just see us into the future seeing with the National Forest Service. It's just things are going to have to shift based on unpredictable possibilities. And so I guess I'm just, I don't know, I just wanted to say that because I never hear people say it's climate change, and I'm like, that's what it is. So do you have any thoughts on that before we go?
Madam Chair, Councilorwoman Villarreal, just a little thing to think about is when Cerro Grande happened years ago, there's a lot of paperwork done, a lot of investigations done, everything looked into that. Just looking at that, I think that that's going to come into effect after this one now happened. Don't know for sure, but I'm sure that they will reevaluate everything that they have to do. To include X amount of days on looking at the weather observations before and after to try and predict it. Because they do have to have spot weather forecasts for that specific area before they can actually implement their plan.
Okay, okay, do we have a motion?
Move for approval.
Second?
Motion is second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes. Thank you for staying. Sorry to keep you so late. I know you have many, many other things and places to be. Action items, we have none. Executive session, we do not have one. Matters from staff. Okay, matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Tuesday, May 31st. We are adjourned.